I never thought my birthday would cause such a stir at work, but here we are. It all started when I was chatting with one of my clients, Louise, during a routine meeting about her project. She's a lovely woman, full of energy, and somehow, amid our usual discussions about budgets and timelines, my birthday came up. I casually mentioned that it was just a week away. I thought nothing of it until I overheard Louise bringing it up to my coworkers later on. That's when I got this sinking feeling in my stomach. It was one thing to share a piece of personal information with a client, it was another to hear her reprimanding my team for not remembering my birthday. "How could you forget? It's the least you could do," she'd exclaimed, her tone laced with disbelief. I could feel my cheeks burning as I listened from the other side of the office, trying to fade into the wall as I felt the weight of each word. I mean, I like my birthday, but I also know it's not a holiday that everyone should mark on their calendars. I'm not one to seek attention or make a fuss over it, but the embarrassment was magnified when I noticed my coworkers awkwardly shifting in their seats, clearly uncomfortable. It began to snowball into something much bigger, and I couldn't shake the thought that I had triggered this because I had been too open. I considered messaging Louise to downplay her reaction, but then I worried it might just make her think I agreed with her. Either way, I knew I had inadvertently set my coworkers up for an uncomfortable situation, and now I was stuck wishing I had just kept my mouth shut. The office turned into this strange battlefield of awkward smiles and half-hearted birthday wishes, and despite my attempts to mask my feelings, I couldn't help but feel a bit resentful about the whole ordeal. Was I the asshole for sharing my birthday in the first place? Should I have anticipated that it might end up being a spectacle? As I left work that evening, I kept replaying the day in my head, questioning my choice to disclose something so simple yet loaded with social ramifications. I could hear snippets of conversations echoing in my mind, Louise's words haunting me, "You deserve better." Did I? Was it really a big deal for others to forget? I had planned to shrug it off, but now I felt like I'd sparked a drama that could have stayed dormant. Reflecting back now, I realize it was possibly just a lesson in setting boundaries. Maybe I do hold some responsibility for oversharing, but I couldn't shake the notion that others should also respect the space of personal milestones. Fast forward a few days, my coworkers did make an effort to celebrate, albeit small and awkwardly, as they surprised me with a cake during lunch. There were smiles, laughter, and an unspoken truce in the air. But even then, as I blew out the candles, I had the nagging thought of how easily a simple birthday mention could ignite such confusion and pressure. It made me wonder about how often we unintentionally make simple things complicated for ourselves and others, all while trying to connect. So, was I the asshole? Maybe a bit, but we're all learning how to navigate this tangled web of human interactions together, and perhaps that's the real gift we can give each other. The day after my birthday celebration, I came in to find the atmosphere at the office tinged with tension, like the unsettling silence before a storm. My heart sank a bit. I worried that whatever truce we had formed during the cake outing was fragile, and I hadn't fully realized how profound a small detail, my birthday, could disrupt our workplace harmony. The client, a woman named Sandra, had been with our firm for a couple of years, and though her expectations were often daunting, she had become someone I regarded with a mix of respect and caution. By late morning, just as I was settling into yet another round of emails, she called me into her corner office. With her polished, efficient demeanor, she casually mentioned how my coworkers had eviled my birthday but then proceeded to express her utter disapproval of their forgetfulness. It's honestly shocking how they didn't even acknowledge it. "Everyone should celebrate those little moments," she said, shaking her head, her tone pointed and almost accusatory. Honestly, I had never thought much about how to gauge others' reactions to my birthday. I disclosed this fact in what I thought was a light-hearted manner, just casual chit-chat, but instead, it felt like I dropped a bomb on her perceptions of my coworkers. The weight of her disappointment settled heavily on my chest, and I stumbled over my words, trying to defend a bunch of well-meaning people who were, admittedly, not always attentive but were far from malicious. As I left her office, an uncomfortable swirl of emotions bubbled inside me. I wondered where negligence ended and ignorance began. Did I have a right to be upset that they hadn't celebrated? Sure, but spending my birthday celebrating with cake brought me joy, not resentment. Still, her words echoed in my mind throughout the day, creating an uneasy tension that gnawed at the back of my brain. As the week progressed, I noticed Sandra growing more agitated with my team. Small complaints escalated into dramatic statements. "I expect better," she said during one of our weekly project meetings, rubbing her temple as if the world's woes lay on her shoulders. My coworkers exchanged glances, their unease felt like a strained rope, nearly ready to snap. I found myself in a precarious position, loving my team while also recognizing Sandra's discomfort, which had blossomed into an incongruous empathy. But did I have a stake in this? Should I have kept my mouth shut about my birthday? It was as if I had unintentionally thrust myself into the role of mediator, which only amplified the urgency of the whole situation. I realized that this spiral could only worsen if my team wanted a solid working relationship with someone as pivotal as Sandra. So, out of sheer desperation, I decided it was time to bring everyone together for an honest chat. I couldn't let this disruption continue swirling without some clarity. I called a meeting, not in the conference room, but in the cozy local cafe down the street, an escape from the intense corporate atmosphere. As I spoke, voicing my feelings about the situation, there was an unexpected silence. I could see the light of recognition flicker in my coworkers' eyes. I was no longer just airing a grievance but revealing my vulnerability. They shared how they sometimes felt lost in the busyness and, admittedly, how they had forgotten dates of significance in their own lives too. It was a moment of liberation, like we were all unwrapping a big fabric blanket that had been suffocating us. Together, we acknowledged that while we didn't celebrate my birthday as we could have, it didn't define how we valued each other. The conversation deepened, evolving into an understanding that we were all learning to respect one another's feelings and acknowledge celebrations big and small. Afterward, I had a real talk with Sandra. It wasn't easy, but I decided to be upfront. I explained that while I appreciated her taking an interest in my birthday, I also saw how this had inadvertently strained relationships within my team. To my surprise, she listened. The hardened front softened just a bit. She admitted it had struck a nerve, realizing she often placed high expectations not just onto others, but on herself as well. It was a reckoning for both of us, one that we navigated into understanding rather than confrontation. And so, while my birthday had sparked something unsettling, it also unearthed an opportunity for connection. As the days turned into weeks, something shifted. There was less tension, more laughter in the office, and even hints of planned celebrations for upcoming occasions. I learned that sometimes being the catalyst for tough conversations wasn't so much about assuming a role of blame or validation but about opening a door for understanding. I felt less like I was wading through unsteady emotional waters and more like I was standing on solid ground. Reflecting on it now, maybe there was never a concrete answer to whether I was the asshole. Maybe what mattered was the fact that we all had to communicate, flawed as we might be, and through that, we grew. I think we're all figuring it out, and who knows? Perhaps the next birthday will be more about the celebration of connection than a single forgotten date. As the weeks rolled on after that birthday, I felt a subtle shift not just within myself, but in the dynamics of the office. It was as if we had collectively let out a breath we didn't even know we were holding. Conversations became easier, lighter, and I could see my coworkers making a real effort to connect beyond just the sterile exchange of emails and deadlines. We had been teetering on the edge of a delicate balance, and somehow, that cake had nudged us back into a healthier rhythm. Here's the thing, I'd always been the quiet one, dragging my feet into the background while my louder colleagues basked in the spotlight. But in this newfound openness, I found myself stepping forward more, sharing ideas during our meetings, even leading a brainstorming session one chilly Thursday morning. The sense of camaraderie grew, and for once, I didn't dread Monday mornings. It was like we were tuning up a symphony, each of us finding our notes and harmonizing together, a far cry from where we had been just the month before. Then came Tasha's email. She was one of the most ambitious project managers I'd ever met, a real firecracker. Her bright personality could light up even the dullest meeting, and maybe because I respected her so much, it stung more when I saw the subject line, "Can I ask a favor?" I braced myself as I clicked it open. She needed help preparing for a presentation, a significant pitch to our higher-ups. The kind of deal that could elevate our entire team. Despite my earlier hesitation, I felt a spark of energy flow through me with the prospect of collaborating with her. There was a boldness in saying yes that I hadn't recognized before. We spent hours piecing together our ideas, and as we worked, I shared a little more of myself, my thoughts, my fears about failing, the weight of those uncelebrated years. "This is good stuff, you know?" Tasha said, her eyes lighting up as she read through the bullet points I had drafted. "You should be more vocal about this stuff, honestly. Don't wait for the others to notice you." I remember chuckling, feeling a warmth spread across my face. After our session, she scooted her chair closer, as if she was initiating a secret mission. "Since you're, actually celebrating birthdays now, what are your thoughts about throwing a little office party next month?" Her words lingered long after I left the conference room. Doubts flitted through my mind, What if it was received poorly? What if everyone forgot again? But I silenced those whispers. I wanted to embrace this new sense of connection, to lean into the unpretentious chaos of birthdays and celebrate the chaotic beauty of our imperfect human existence. So I sent out a quirky, light-hearted invitation to the team, asking them to participate in what I cheekily called my half-birthday bash because, sure, why not make it more absurd? I even set up a small wishing wall with sticky notes where everyone could leave behind little notes of encouragement or inside jokes. When the day arrived, there was laughter and genuine excitement. We all wore colorful party hats, and for a moment, none of us were focused on deadlines or corporate structures. We were just a bunch of folks sharing laughter and memories. As we all gathered around the table, I realized I wasn't solely championing the significance of birthdays for my own sake anymore. I was celebrating our efforts to connect in ways that transcended just remembering a date. The simple act of showing up for one another, of taking interest, of daring to be vulnerable amidst laughter and goofy decorations, it meant something far more poignant than I could have articulated a few months ago. I watched as my colleagues swapped stories and shared awkward moments, each little tidbit weaving us closer together. And as I blew out candles again, half a year's worth of dreams and aspirations, I knew that we had moved beyond being just coworkers. We were becoming something more like a family. So, was I the asshole for mentioning my birthday? Maybe, maybe not. In the end, I realized it was never just about that single cake or who remembered what date. It was about giving ourselves permission to be seen, to be celebrated, and to navigate the complexities of our relationships. Maybe, just maybe, the real lesson I learned wasn't about birthdays at all. It was about the richness of presence, of kindness, and allowing each other to grow, one imperfect step at a time. I used to believe that family gatherings were supposed to be filled with laughter and joy, yet somehow, our last holiday dinner descended into chaos. Let me set the scene. It was Thanksgiving, and I was in charge of dessert, my mother's famous chocolate chip cookies being the star of the show. They were known far and wide among the family as the best cookies you could ever get your hands on, golden brown, gooey chocolate bits, and a hint of vanilla that danced on your palate like a warm hug. My brother-in-law, Keith, had always been a little difficult, often bringing an air of annoyance when he was around, but this year was different. He showed up late, barely acknowledged anyone, and then proceeded to complain about everything, how the turkey was dry, how nobody ever made the side dishes he liked, and the weather being freezing. I tried to shake off the irritation and focus on the food, but with each comment, my blood started to simmer a little more. When it finally came time for dessert, I served up the cookies, my heart racing as I encouraged everyone to dig in. But, of course, Keith couldn't help himself. He picked one up, looked at it with disdain, and said, "Of course, you made your mom's cookies again. Can't you ever try anything new?" My heart sank. I felt the anger rise within me, but I took a deep breath. Instead of reacting, I smiled tightly and offered him a cookie. This only seemed to amuse him. "You're really giving me a cookie? I'd expect nothing less from you. Guess you don't know how to handle criticism." His laughter rang out, a harsh note in the otherwise merry atmosphere. The hubbub of family chatter quieted for a moment, and I could feel all eyes on us. I held my ground, a mixture of disbelief and outrage bubbling beneath the surface. "Yeah, Keith, but at least I know how to bake," I shot back, half joking, half hurt. The family chuckled nervously, unsure whether to side with me or with their amusingly cynical cousin-in-law. As I stood there, cookie in hand, I felt this strange urge to actually give him what he wanted. I walked over to him, handed him the cookie with a challenging smile, and said, "Here, have a cookie, and maybe it'll sweeten your mood." To my surprise, he grabbed it, still smirking, and took a big bite. In that moment, I felt the tension shift, although I wasn't quite sure how. I'd fueled his rudeness, sure, but maybe I'd also diffused it just a little. The night went on, laughter returning, but my heart still felt bruised. I couldn't shake off the question, did I let him get away with his bad behavior, or did I actually stand up for myself? The next day, I found myself checking on a Reddit community, unsure of how to process my feelings. AITA for giving my Bill his favorite cookie when he was being rude? I typed into the post, desperate for validation, or at least some perspective. The comments flooded in, with people defending me and others pointing fingers at my choice of dessert diplomacy. It seemed I had become somewhat of an unwilling instigator in our family drama. As I read through the responses, I realized that navigating family dynamics is akin to walking a tightrope. You either fall flat or somehow manage to find your balance, and perhaps in that chaotic moment, I had done both. It wasn't just about the cookies, it was about setting boundaries, about standing my ground while still trying to maintain a sense of family cohesion. In the end, maybe I had learned that sometimes sweetness is a necessary ingredient, even when mixed with a little bitterness. As I settled back into my chair, the afternoon sun streaming through the kitchen window, I found myself reflecting on the tiny whirlwind that had spun out of a simple cookie. It had all started innocently enough. My brother-in-law, Eric, was visiting with my sister, and I had baked his favorite chocolate chip cookies as a welcome gesture. Everyone was buzzing with laughter and chatter when Eric walked in, eyes lighting up at the sight of the cookie platter like a kid in a candy store. But the atmosphere shifted almost instantly when he made a snide comment about my choice of music playing softly in the background, mocking it as old people stuff. The laughter died, hovering awkwardly in the air, and I could feel the unspoken tension brewing around the room, a recipe for disaster. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to brush it off and carry on with the festivities, but another part of me felt stung, like a nagging bee buzzing in my ear that I couldn't swat away. As the minutes passed, more jabs followed, with Eric sarcastically commenting on everything from the decorations to the fact that I'd made too many cookies. Meanwhile, my sister wore a tight-lipped smile, clearly torn between her brother and her loyalty to me. I felt myself boiling under the surface, wanting to shout back, to remind him that we weren't in high school anymore, but I held my tongue, choosing instead to act with what I hoped was grace. Finally, with a heavy heart and a sigh, I picked up a cookie, carefully placed it on a napkin, and walked over to where Eric sat, acting as if I were making a friendly gesture. "Hey, Eric," I said, my voice surprisingly steady despite the turmoil inside, "I thought you might like one of these. The extra chocolate chips might make it sweeter than your comments today." I handed him the cookie, watching his surprise morph into a frown. His eyes narrowed for a second, and I could almost see the gears turning in his head. Was he going to take the bait or rise above it? To my astonishment, he took the cookie with a mixture of annoyance and confusion, a silent acknowledgement of the jab but also an acceptance of the olive branch. I watched as he took a hesitant bite, and for a fleeting moment, our eyes locked, and I wondered if this was the beginning of a truce or merely a temporary ceasefire. The room felt heavy but oddly charged. What I'd expected to be a cookie throwdown turned into some strange form of diplomacy that none of us had anticipated, as laughter crept back into the air, albeit a bit quieter, and conversation resumed. Yet that moment of shared, albeit tense, sweetness lingered between us. I started to realize that maybe, just maybe, my act of defiance combined with kindness had opened a door for communication, creating a space to address the larger issues lurking beneath the surface of our family gatherings. After they left, I sat at the kitchen table, the cookie platter almost empty, a culinary victory mixed with emotional exhaustion. Over the next few days, I shared the story with close friends, weaving the threads of our tangled family fabric into a narrative that resonated with them. Some saw me as courageous, while others deemed the act a silly misstep. I began to ponder the consequences of my actions. Did I empower Eric to be even ruder, or had I planted a seed for change? It sparked a conversation between my sister and me later when I told her how I felt about Eric's behavior. Her refreshingly candid response helped clear some of the air between us. She recognized his sarcasm was a cover for his own insecurities. Perhaps we were all just trying to cope with familial pressures in our ways, finding humor where we could, even if it meant hurling cookies into verbal sparring matches. Now, weeks later, the sun still pours in through the kitchen window, and every time I bake those cookies, I can't help but smile at the absurdity of it all. The cookies became a symbol of a balance I was learning to create, a reminder that sometimes, a lighthearted jab mixed with sweetness can lead to deeper conversations that needed addressing. Eric still has his moments of arrogance, but every once in a while, he'll comment about the cookies with a hint of respect in his tone, and that's enough for me. It feels like we're navigating towards some sort of truce, where laughter and playful jabs can coexist without becoming a battlefield. Each cookie baked now carries the weight of that experience, a reminder that within family, love is often wrapped in layers of confusion, but a sprinkle of sweetness can break through the hard shell. It was one of those crisp autumn afternoons when I found myself scrolling through my phone, the sun filtering through the golden leaves and casting a warm glow across my kitchen. I had just baked a fresh batch of my famous chocolate chip cookies, the smell wafting through the house like a cozy blanket. It was peaceful, but I couldn't shake the lingering thoughts of Eric and our previous exchanges. The echo of his rude comments played in my mind, often mixed with his surprising candor since our cookie incident, which left me perplexed but hopeful. As I arranged those golden brown treats on the cooling rack, a sense of nostalgia washed over me. Eric and I had grown up laughing and fighting like siblings do, and my cookies had always been a point of pride for me in the family, something I could offer freely too. Both quell tensions and nurture connections. I remember my grandmother baking for us, how her treats were a salve to any quarrel, and it struck me then in that serene moment that perhaps I had inherited more than just her recipes. I had inherited a legacy of connection and communication, albeit a messy one through family feuds and the occasional burning oven mishap. Later that evening, after a long day, I found myself sitting on the back porch with my husband, Jake, discussing dinner plans when the distant sound of laughter caught my attention. It was Eric outside, tossing a football with my kids, the playful shouts blending with the soft rustling of leaves. A smile crept onto my face. There was something truly comforting about watching them, this chaotic ballet of family life unfolding in the fading light. And then, on a bit of a whim, I pulled out a plate of cookies and made my way to the yard, the soft crunch of fallen leaves beneath my feet. As I approached, I felt a wave of anxiety wash over me. Had that moment of tension with Eric really changed anything? I set the plate down on the picnic table, and as if sensing my uncertainty, Jake leaned in and whispered, "You've got this," sending a tiny spark of confidence rippling through me. "Hey, fellas. Who wants cookies?" I called, trying to keep my tone light. Eric glanced over, his expression shifting from playful to curious, and for a moment, I wondered if I imagined the slight flicker of tension in his brow. "Those look amazing," he said, moving towards the cookies with genuine enthusiasm. "Thanks. They're basically a family tradition now, aren't they?" I quipped, watching for his reaction. The kids rushed in before he could respond, their small hands reaching for the biggest cookies, and a fractional relief washed over me. But then Eric caught my eye, and the playful respect I had been longing for flickered there as he took a cookie and laid a teasing jab in my direction. "Just don't burn them, all right?" he said with a half smile. I was taken off guard but decided to take it in stride. "Only if you promise to stop pretending you're better than everyone else in the kitchen," I shot back playfully, trying to mirror his tone. For a moment, silence hung heavy, and I braced myself for the fallout, the jovial sounds of my kids momentarily fading into the background. But then, to my amazement, Eric laughed, throwing his head back as if he'd just heard the world's best joke. "Fine, truce. For the cookies, I'll keep my arrogance in check," he replied, breaking into a grin. That exchange ignited something between us. The laughter seemed to bridge an unspoken divide, and I felt a weight lift. The moment was fleeting, but I knew in a way that I didn't fully understand yet, it was significant. As the evening grew darker, we sat outside. The kids played around us while we shared stories, our banter on the edge of sibling rivalry. I could see Eric relax, watch him drop the bravado just enough to be both earnest and playful. It felt as if every cookie was both a peace offering and a cornerstone, in a way I hadn't expected. And as I watched my family together, laughter mingling with words and playful jabs, something inside me settled. Maybe the path to understanding isn't straight, it's messy and wild, filled with cookies, black and white sibling disputes, and moments of clarity. I looked over at Eric, who from that moment on felt less like an opponent and more like family, in all its bittersweet chaos. It occurred to me then that sometimes a simple cookie really can change everything. I never imagined my life would turn into a reality show, and yet here I am, sitting on my porch with a cup of lukewarm coffee, replaying the whole mess in my head. You see, I share custody of my two kids, Clara and Jake, with their mother, Sophie. We navigated the stormy seas of divorce with a semblance of civility, or at least I thought we did. But when she informed me she was being deployed for 6 months, my heart dropped. Not because she was going away, this was her career after all, but because of what it meant for our kids. Sophie married Matt, a guy I've never really clicked with. He's a nice enough guy, sure, but there's something about him that makes me uneasy, especially when it comes to my kids. As deployment day approached, it became clearer that Matt would be the primary caretaker. I felt a knot of anxiety tightening in my stomach, especially after hearing some stories from friends about step-parents not being all they're cracked up to be. I had a chat with Sophie before the big day and the topic came up. She was oblivious to the little voice in my head telling me, "What if he's not a safe choice for your kids?" I mentioned my reservations, trying to tread lightly, but the look on her face made me feel like I had toppled a stack of fragile glassware. The conversation quickly turned into a heated debate. "He's their stepfather, he loves them just as much as you do," she had said, her voice rising. I tried to explain my perspective, but it felt like I was shouting into a whirlpool. When Sophie left for deployment, my anxiety only swelled. I finally had a heart-to-heart with myself and decided to reach out to her via text. "I can't let the kids stay with Matt while you're gone," I typed out, heart racing. I knew it was a bold statement, but I felt it was necessary. But the moment I hit send, I felt that familiar pit of doubt unearth itself. Did I cross a line? A few minutes later, my phone chimed, and her response was swift and vehement. "You can't just decide that without discussing it. He is their stepfather." I wanted to explain how uneasy I felt, but instead, I simply felt a wave of guilt wash over me. After what felt like an eternity of back and forth texts, I told her flat out that this wasn't about her, or even Matt, but my kids' safety and well-being. The silence that followed was deafening and uncomfortable. I hung up feeling like I had ignited a harsh storm. I thought about Clara and Jake. I could picture them standing there with us as Sophie packed her bags, tears pooling in their innocent eyes. I wanted to protect them, but was I truly the asshole for trying to create a better environment for their safety? We eventually settled on a temporary solution, where the kids would stay with my parents while Sophie was away. But the tension between Sophie and me took longer to ease. I still think about that day and wonder if I made the right call. Maybe I'm overprotective, or maybe deep down I just didn't trust Matt. Regardless, I'm still waiting for things to settle. It's hard to navigate the choppy waters of co-parenting when all anyone wants is peace. I guess I'll figure it out as we go along, one day at a time, hoping to find some clarity amidst the chaos. The weeks that followed were like a slow drip of rain, each day heavy with uncertainty. I kept rationalizing my decision, telling myself I was only acting in my children's best interest, but it felt different when I was alone with my thoughts at night. My parents had welcomed the kids with open arms, their house filled with laughter and the occasional squabble over toys, but every time I left them there, a knot would tighten in my stomach. I had spent years feeling like the steady, guiding hand, and handing that responsibility over, even temporarily, was daunting. My phone buzzed on the kitchen counter one Thursday evening, pulling me from my reverie. It was a message from Sophie. My heart skipped. It had been a few days since we last spoke, and I didn't know what to expect. It read, "Can we talk?" That single sentence felt like a prelude to a storm. I knew it would lead to either a breakthrough or another wave of conflict. I hesitated for a moment, the screen lighting up my anxious face as I typed, "Sure, when?" After a few agonizing minutes, she replied, "I'm free after the kids' bedtime," which was just a few hours away. I spent those hours pacing my living room, running through countless scenarios in my head, silently rehearsing my lines, clutching at the fragile threads of our co-parenting arrangement. When the clock finally struck 8, I sat with my hands tightly wrapped around a mug of lukewarm tea, my heart thudding. The kids were happily lost in a story with my parents, and for the first time in weeks, the quiet felt like both a blessing and a curse. Sophie arrived just as the moon peeked through the clouds, casting an ethereal glow across the room. I motioned for her to sit, and there was an almost palpable tension in the air, thick enough that I could almost taste my apprehension. "Can we put everything on the table?" she started, her voice steady but laced with a subtle edge of frustration. I nodded, steeling myself for what was sure to be a tricky conversation. She spoke about her deployment, the fears and uncertainties she faced, not just with her job but the lingering anxiety about who was taking care of her kids while she was away. Matt, her husband, had been asking about when he could see them, and I could see how torn she was. She wanted to trust him, wanted to believe he could take care of the kids as well as she could, but I could hear the unspoken doubts in her words. "I just don't think he's ready," I said finally, feeling the heat rush to my cheeks. "He's only been part of their lives for a little while, and they're still adjusting. I can't just let them go without knowing they're safe." "That's what it comes down to, isn't it?" she replied, her voice rising slightly. "You don't trust him. You don't trust me." The accusation hung in the air, sharp and biting. I opened my mouth to respond but then closed it again, realizing that the truth was more complicated than that. It wasn't just distrust, it was coming from a place of love. My love for our kids made my instincts flare up like a wildfire. "I want what's best for them, Sophie," I finally said, words mostly clipped, the emotion backing them sending tremors through my chest. "But I've seen what can happen when things go wrong. What if he loses control? What if they don't feel safe? I just wanted to protect them." Her expression softened, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of understanding in her eyes. "I get it. I really do. But they need their dad, too, and I need space to know they're okay when I'm gone. Can't we find a way?" Suddenly, the walls of our conflict felt like they were shifting, and I found myself considering her plea through the lens of a mother's fear. Perhaps my stance was too rigid, too rooted in my own fears. I'm willing to give him a chance, but we both need to establish boundaries and rules, I proposed, an inkling of compromise blossoming amidst the tension. As we talked, laying everything on the table, I started to envision a plan, one that we could both agree upon. It felt good to share the weight, and that heaviness lightened just a little. By the time we parted ways that night, I felt a cautious optimism. I still had my reservations about Matt, and perhaps that wasn't going to change overnight. But we had taken a step forward, and I clung to that. As I tucked myself into bed later, the moonlight lining my room with a silver glow, I felt a little more centered. I didn't know what the road ahead would look like, but I hoped that we could navigate it together. I fell asleep that night dreaming of balance, of co-parenting that resembled a dance, one careful step at a time, learning to trust the rhythm while keeping the safety of our children in mind. Days turned into weeks, and as Sophie's deployment drew closer, I was learning that compromise didn't signify weakness, it was a bridge toward understanding. As for an update, I'd say it's a work in progress. I still worry about Matt and keep communication open with Sophie. But every time I see my kids laughing and thriving, whether at my parents' house or during a brief visit with their dad, I understand that we're crafting a new kind of family, one rooted in collaboration and love. Maybe that's what peace really looks like for us, each day, each decision, building our way to a place where everyone feels safe. As Sophie's deployment drew closer, I was learning that compromise didn't signify weakness, it was a bridge toward understanding. As for an update, I'd say it's a work in progress. I still worry about Matt and keep communication open with Sophie. But every time I see my kids laughing and thriving, whether at my parents' house or during a brief visit with their dad, I understand that we're crafting a new kind of family, one rooted in collaboration and love. Maybe that's what peace really looks like for us, each day, each decision, building our way to a place where everyone feels safe. In those early weeks, I grappled with sleepless nights, rolling over to see the empty half of my bed, again. My thoughts circled like vultures, always settling back to Matt. I'd heard rumors about his past, how he wasn't just another face in the crowd, but a man who had stumbled through some shady days before cleaning up his act. I wanted to trust Sophie's judgment, but that nagging voice in the back of my mind made it difficult to unwind. One afternoon over coffee at our usual cafe, I shared my concerns with Sophie. She sat across from me, brow furrowed, and I could tell my worries were weighing on her heart. "You know, it's not easy for me either," she sighed, stirring her drink absent-mindedly. "I chose to be with Matt because I saw the good in him. I feel torn, really. But I'm the one in the middle." Her honesty, raw and tangible, made that barrier between us feel thinner for a moment. I wanted to assure her that I had her and the kids' best interests at heart, but the whole situation felt so convoluted. After a couple of weeks, the shifts began to show. The kids returned from Grandma's house animated, joy bubbling in their voices as they recapped the fishing trips with Grandpa and the story times that stretched late into the night. Even the way they lit up at the mention of their mom made me smile, at least they were secure in that love. But there was a shadow on the periphery when they mentioned how Matt had taken them hiking. I could feel my heart rate quicken. What had that outing entailed? One evening, I mustered up the courage to call him directly. Sophie had given me his number when I expressed my need for clarity. I wanted to get a sense of his intentions before the kids spent another weekend with him. As the phone rang, I felt a mix of anxiety and unexpected responsibility surge through my veins. "Hey, it's Jake," I said when he picked up. "Hey, man. What's up?" There was a casual ease in his voice that made me want to drown it out with 1,000 questions. Instead, I chose one. "I just wanted to check in about the kids." "Yeah, they're great. We had a blast hiking the other day. They've got energy for days." I could picture him, the smile stretched across his face, but I needed more than just enthusiasm. His joy felt almost superficial. "Look, can we be real here?" I went on, taking a leap. "I'm just trying to understand the boundaries here. Their safety is my priority, you know?" A silence hung between us, thickening the air like humidity before a storm. "Totally get it, man," he replied finally, his tone shifting slightly. "You don't have to worry. I care about your kids." With that, I felt a twinge of something, a glimmer of hope, maybe? Or was it just a trapdoor opening into more anxiety? Either way, I didn't want to dismiss that hint of sincerity. As the days rolled on, I took this budding relationship with Matt as an opportunity to breathe. I started to see him more as a partner in this shared responsibility rather than just a potential threat. That shift didn't come easy. There were still moments when I felt the urge to shield my kids, to declare my territory. But then I'd witness them during their visits, their giggles echoing, loud and free, and it reminded me that every step forward was a blessing. The real test came one Saturday evening. Sophie called, her voice laced with urgency. "Jake, Matt and we had a fight. He said some things, and it got heated. Can you take the kids for a few days?" Hearing her raw vulnerability made my heart race, but I immediately tailored my response to how I'd want to react, calm, collected. "Of course, I can. Just focus on you and keeping everything together." As I squeezed my kids close for a sleepover in the living room that night, each of them curled into a little ball of comfort on the couch while they drifted to sleep. And there, in that warm cocoon of blankets and pillows, I felt that flicker of hope again. This new family we were building might just be fragile, but it was rich with potential, woven together with care. In a way, we were rewriting the narrative that life had drafted for us. Maybe, just maybe, we would find peace in this chaotic co-parenting journey, moment by tender moment. Reflecting on it now, I'm still trying to figure things out, but I believe we're finding our way. I know it won't be perfect, progress rarely is, but those smiles on the kids' faces remind me that even within uncertainty, there's a promise of warmth. And for now, I'll keep nurturing that promise, wherever it may lead us. I never thought I'd find myself in a position where I'd have to question whether or not I was the asshole for something so trivial, but here I was, staring at a pot of burnt spaghetti and 1,000 thoughts swirling in my head. That's how it always started, my wife Kelly's cooking adventures. The first time we had dinner together, she crafted this incredible dish that made my taste buds dance. I thought I'd struck gold. But as months turned into years, I came to realize that her culinary skill wasn't so much an adventure as it was an ongoing gamble. Sometimes we'd feast like kings, and other times, well, let's just say a pizza delivery was always a phone call away. It wasn't that she didn't try, she genuinely loved to cook. I admired her passion and enthusiasm, often overshadowing her misadventures in the kitchen with supportive cheers and lighthearted jokes. What I did not count on was how that playful joking would snap back one evening when frustration eclipsed my empathy. It was a Tuesday, the day she usually cooked and, as fate would have it, she attempted a new recipe from a cooking show she'd binge-watched. I could hear the sizzle from the living room. Hours passed, the aroma was less vibrant than I remembered, and I felt a knot of instinctual dread. When she finally presented her new creation, my heart sank. It was, remarkably, a gloppy mass that resembled the aftermath of a science experiment gone wrong. I took a deep breath, knowing I should keep my mouth shut, but the words escaped before I could catch them. "Kelly, maybe you shouldn't cook." The moment they left my lips, I could feel the weight of what I'd said crashing down on us. The laughter I'd hoped for with my light teasing transformed into a crumbling silence. Hurt flickered across her face, and with it, the shift in the atmosphere left me breathless. I defended myself, trying to explain my feelings, but I could see my words peeling back layers of her self-esteem, and it was suffocating. We ended up eating leftovers, both of us too wrapped in our own thoughts to even playfully argue about whose turn it was to pick the takeout. I went to bed that night wrestling with a whirlwind of guilt, convinced I'd crossed a line. Was I just frustrated from a long day? Or was I genuinely an asshole for being so blunt? I kept replaying her expression, that flicker of disappointment that felt like a stab to my heart. I tried to talk to her the next day, but the energy had shifted, she was quieter, her laughter diminished. I missed the light-hearted banter that filled our home, the warm aroma of love that cooking together always brought. After a few days of silence and the awkwardness that lingered like a bad aftertaste, I finally sat her down and apologized. I told her how much I cherished her attempts and how it didn't matter if dinner wasn't perfect, it was the effort and love behind it that counted. We talked, really talked, unraveling the misgivings each of us felt. I wanted her to know I wasn't trying to attack her passion, I was just overwhelmed by the constant letdowns. After that frank conversation, we came to an understanding, a cooking schedule that would help her try simpler meals and, on days when she wanted to experiment, we'd do it together. I think that's what our relationship needed, real communication. I still remember her eyes brightening at the thought of cooking together, and even as we stumbled through the recipes, we made a hell of a mess that turned into so many laughs. And honestly, that's what I needed too, a reminder that it's not about the food. It's about the love served alongside it. In the end, I realized we were both learning in our own way, catering to each other's strengths, and I could only hope that she never stopped experimenting in the kitchen, no matter what. It's funny how a simple spatula can become a bridge in a relationship, transforming small arguments over burnt toast into laughter over spilled sauce. I hadn't expected our cooking sessions to turn into something special, but as we continued, they became a staple of our weekends. We'd put on music, her playlist with those catchy pop songs that made me think of summer even in the snowy months, and take our time chopping, boiling, and mixing ingredients as if we were crafting a masterpiece rather than just a dinner. I can still hear her singing off-key while I struggled with the knife skills I'd picked up from culinary shows. The first time we attempted a homemade pizza, I thought it was going to end in disaster, given how she had no idea that dough needs to breathe. But the mishaps turned into moments we'd cherish forever, like when the cheese overflowed and we both just stood there, giggling amidst the chaotic kitchen. I began to appreciate that cooking was more than just a task, it was a canvas for our creativity and a testament to our partnership. We'd watch videos on new techniques, eager to impress each other. Sometimes, when it didn't go quite as planned, like that time the chicken ended up tasting like a rubber ball, we would just order takeout and sink into the couch to binge watch something stupid. It wasn't about perfection, and I think that realization was the turning point for both of us. I could see her confidence growing, not just with the meals but in herself, which lit a fire in me to be more encouraging, to let her know it's perfectly okay to mess up. On one particularly snowy afternoon, we decided to tackle a new recipe, a beef stew that required hours of patience, simmering on the stove while the aroma danced around us. As the rich scent filled the house, she looked at me with a gleam in her eye and said, "This feels real, doesn't it? Like home." And in that moment, it hit me, this was our home. It wasn't just the walls or the furniture, it was in these shared experiences, in the laughter, in the mess, that made all the difference. We spent that evening curled up on the couch, bowls in hand, talking about our dreams and plans, while flurries tapped lightly at the windows. It made me reflect on how easy it had been to focus on the negatives, to get caught in a spiral of frustration rather than celebrating what we had. The evolution of our cooking sessions mirrored that change. Together, we'd stirred up much more than just ingredients, we'd cooked up understanding, patience, and a renewed sense of teamwork. I know there will always be days ahead where everything won't taste like a Michelin star meal, but I've learned it doesn't need to. In those moments, I realized that we could laugh at ourselves, pull together as a team, and enjoy whatever the outcome. Looking back now, I can't help but smile at how far we've come. In the early days, I worried that I hadn't handled things well, that my words had been too harsh or damaging. But those days full of flour and spills have shifted the narrative between us. Together, we discovered the joy of cooking wasn't in the final dish but in sharing the mess, and somewhere between those meals, we found a renewed sense of love for each other, simmering just right. And I really, truly hope we never stop serving each other in the kitchen or beyond. It's funny how life can dish out unexpected lessons in the most mundane settings. Just the other night, after an exceptionally busy day, I found myself curled up on the couch, savoring that sense of contentment that follows a full, laughter-filled day. The kitchen was alive with the warm glow of the evening sun filtering through the curtains, and the scent of garlic, the unmistakable aroma of a concoction my wife had put together on her own. It struck me that a few months ago, I would have been feeling the gnaw of anxiety as I anticipated another meal that might miss the mark. Now, however, I found myself leaning back, letting the scents wash over me, a soft smile creeping onto my face. I marveled at how far we'd come and how, in many ways, we were still finding ourselves and each other amidst the chaos of life. That evening, I got up to help her, making my way into the kitchen, and as soon as I entered, she turned to me with a smirk. "You ready to test your sous chef skills?" she teased, a sparkle in her eye. I chuckled, wrapping my arms around her waist, pulling her close for a brief moment. "Only if you promise to save some for me this time," I said, recalling one of our earliest experiments where I'd gotten so involved in chopping vegetables that I inadvertently turned our dinner into an impromptu taste tasting, grabbing for each bite like a ravenous beast. She laughed, recalling our culinary disasters with an affection that painted over the stresses of those earlier days. We chopped and stirred, shared playful banter, and I could see her confidence grow with every dish. Each splatter of sauce felt like a brushstroke on the canvas of our relationship, transforming a bland palate into something vibrant. As she stirred the pot, I noticed the little things, the way she bit her lip when she was focused, the gentle hum she made when she was happy. It was all part of the woman I fell in love with, and I realized that those delightful quirks brought more to our time together than any perfect meal ever could. We talked about our week, shared our worries, and I felt like each shared ingredient was a piece of ourselves being mixed together, creating something unique and beautiful. I appreciated how our partnership had deepened, not just in the kitchen but across every part of our lives. We were learning to communicate better, understanding the importance of patience and support, even outside the realm of recipes. When dinner was finally served, I couldn't help but grin at the sight before us, a colorful array of far from restaurant quality dishes spread across the table and absolutely bursting with love. We gawked at them for a moment, both of us silently agreeing that it was more about the laughter than how many Michelin stars we could earn. As we sat down, I held her hand across the table, feeling a swell of gratitude that she had taken a chance on me, that we hadn't just settled into patterns of complaints, but had chosen instead to laugh and learn. Each bite, while it may have been imperfect, was accompanied by our shared stories, playful digs about culinary schools never calling us back, and the realization that, really, any meal we enjoyed together was bound to be spectacular. Looking back, the moment I made my poorly chosen remark about her cooking, I had no idea our journey would wind into such beautiful chaos. It was as if we had both stepped into a poorly lit kitchen, only to find that together we could brighten the entire room with laughter and understanding. While I still joke that her cooking isn't always perfect, I've learned to appreciate the joy each dish brings. And like the best meals, I hope we continue to spice things up, learning from each other along the way and warming our hearts over whatever we decide to throw into our pots next. I've always loved being the fun aunt, the one who brought the best gifts and made the best jokes, but when my sister and her husband had kids, twins, no less, it felt like someone flipped a switch. Suddenly, I was supposed to shower them with unconditional love, praise, and endless affection, but all I could feel was this nagging sense of disconnect. It's not that I didn't want to love them, I just couldn't seem to connect with them the way everyone expected. I remember visiting them a few days after they came home from the hospital. There were balloons and flowers everywhere, and my sister had that glow about her that only new parents get. The little ones lay sleeping in their cribs, swaddled tightly, and I felt this profound sense of anxiety wash over me. As I sat there, pretending to coo and fuss over them, all I could think was about how quiet it was, how distant it felt, like watching a movie through a foggy lens. I can't quite pinpoint when I started feeling this way. I think it was a few months in, during family gatherings when I noticed the way everyone else looked at the twins, as if they were the center of the universe. I'd smile and play along, help change diapers and keep an eye on them when my sister needed a break, but every time they'd giggle at their parents' silly faces or reach for their hands, a part of me would turn cold. I started to dread all the family outings, feeling more like a spectator than a participant in my sister's new life. She'd look at me with those big expectant eyes, as if waiting for me to beam with pride or joy, but all I could manage was a thin smile while my chest tightened with guilt. Was this normal? I wondered if I was a bad person for not feeling that immediate rush of love everyone keeps talking about. One evening during dinner, the twins let out their loud, high-pitched cries, genuine, baby-like wails that tore through the happy chatter. Everyone jumped to their feet like they were hitting a pause button in a sitcom, and there I was, stuck at the table, fork halfway to my mouth, wondering why no one ever seemed to notice the way I felt. That night, I confided in my close friend, who suggested maybe I was just overwhelmed or needed time. It's okay, she said, not everyone falls in love immediately with babies. But I couldn't shake the feeling that maybe this wasn't a phase. What if I was just not cut out to be around them? As weeks turned into months, and I continued showing up for family dinners, my heart ached because I cared about my sister, her husband, and the kids in a way that felt different from what was expected of me. When my sister called me one night, so excited about their upcoming first birthday party and insisting that I prepare a special speech as the crazy aunt, I felt the weight of my silence grow heavier. I choked out some sort of muted excitement, but inside I was torn. Could I really stand in front of everyone, professing feelings that didn't live in my heart? Would they see me as the villain in this story? The climax of my internal struggle came that day at the birthday party. There were decorations everywhere, laughter filling the air, and a cacophony of joyful chaos swirling around me. As I smiled at the little darlings, I couldn't shake the feeling of just being an outsider in my own family. When it was finally my turn to speak, I stood there, looking at those tiny faces with their cake-covered smiles. I love you guys. I really do, I finally managed, the words feeling foreign yet necessary. And in that moment, I decided to lean into the love I could muster, imperfect and uncertain as it was. It didn't have to look like my sister's love, it just had to be mine. Walking away that evening, I felt a strange mixture of relief and confusion. I hadn't solved the problem, but maybe I didn't need to be the perfect aunt. I was learning that love can take many shapes, even ones that feel unsure. As for my sister? Well, she hasn't brought it up, but I think she knows. Maybe she could see the struggle reflected in my eyes, or maybe, deep down, she just wants me there, flaws and all. I guess time will tell if things will ever change between us. For now, I'm just trying to accept this complicated journey of love and connection, one awkward family dinner at a time. As I sat at the kitchen table, the sounds of laughter and playful squeals wafted in from the living room, where my sister's kids were ramping up for another round of their favorite game. I looked at the scattered remnants of dinner, spaghetti sauce splattered across plates, a half-eaten loaf of garlic bread, and felt that familiar churn in my stomach. It wasn't the food, I've always had a knack for cooking. No, it was the noise of joy reminding me of the gulf that seemed to yawn wider every time I sat in the midst of it. My sister, Marissa, was in her element, laughing as she tried to referee the chaos, a mixture of amusement and exasperation lighting up her eyes. I couldn't help but admire her, the way she navigated the madness with grace, her love bursting at the seams and spilling over into every corner of her home. And there I sat, a few steps back, fumbling to participate without truly understanding how to engage with the lives she was so passionately building. It made me feel like an imposter in my own family, awkward and not quite fitting the mold of the cool aunt I was supposed to be. Marissa had always been the one with the booming personality. She thrived in the company of others, drawing energy from their adoration, while I often found comfort in the quiet corners, away from the spotlight. It wasn't that I didn't care about her children, I just felt a disconnect, a frayed wire in an otherwise buzzing circuit. I've often tried to connect with Lucy and Ben, aged 6 and 8, in little steps. I'd bring them treats when I visited, and I'd ask them questions about their favorite toys or the movies they liked. I wanted to understand their world, but the effort felt clumsy at times. A few weeks ago, I showed up with a brand new box of colorful markers and a stack of blank paper, hoping we could unleash some creativity together. "Look what I brought," I announced, watching eager smiles bloom like flowers. But somehow, my enthusiasm felt out of sync with theirs. They preferred the swift thrill of video games to the slower process of creating, sending me tumbling back into my insecurities. Did I even know how to be an aunt? As I caught a glimpse of my sister's easy banter with the kids, I couldn't escape the gnawing feeling that I was supposed to mirror her warmth. Maybe that was the essence of love in a family, this perfect, enveloping way of being that I struggled to emulate. It left me feeling inadequate, and in those moments, the tension would pull tight across my chest. Would they ever see me as someone who could be just as lovable, despite my hesitations? As I stared into my half-finished glass of Merlot, lost in my thoughts, I noticed Marissa glancing my way. She raised an eyebrow, and her expression shifted from amusement to something keenly perceptive, as if she could read the doubt swirling around in my mind. "Hey, wanna play with us?" Lucy's voice broke through the noise, her big eyes open wide with genuine hope. My heart fluttered, caught in the unexpected warmth of her invitation. Here was a chance to bridge the gap, to step into their world, even if it felt like a leap of faith. "I'm not very good at those games, sweetie," I replied with a hesitant smile, apologetic and self-aware. I saw a flicker of disappointment on her face, but then Ben chimed in, his enthusiasm infectious. "It doesn't matter. We'll teach you." The sheer sincerity in their voices made my heart twist in that bittersweet way. Maybe I could try. Maybe I didn't have to be perfect. In the end, I slowly made my way into the living room, resigning myself to the chaos that awaited me. The game was loud and frantic, full of the sort of competitive energy I usually avoided, one that filled me with anxiety instead of the thrill it sparked in others. I stumbled through the rules the kids shouted in tandem, mixing up characters and misinterpreting strategies, but amidst my blunders, laughter bubbled up and broke the tension like sunlight through clouds. There it was again, that feeling I often chased, the connection pulling us closer, however imperfect it was. As we played, I noticed Lucy and Ben sharing knowing glances, their laughter spilling over into my own smiles. I realized, then, that perhaps I didn't need to love them like their parents did. My love could be quieter, a whisperizing thread in their lives, invisible but strong. As the evening wound down, Marissa leaned in, her arm wrapping around my shoulder as the kids excitedly plotted their next gaming adventure. "You did good, sis. They love having you around," she said, her voice a mix of encouragement and sisterly confidence. I could feel the warmth radiating from her, a flicker of understanding passing between us. It was a moment that made the earlier conversation about love and connections feel less daunting. Maybe love doesn't always scream, sometimes, it hums softly in shared spaces, even in silence. Sitting there surrounded by laughter and chaos, I dared to believe that love could grow in unexpected ways, holding imperfections at its center, and for the first time in a long while, I felt unburdened and content, like I belonged, flaws and all. As the evening wore on, I watched my sister interact with her kids, their laughter wrapping around us like a warm blanket. The way she knelt down to tie her youngest shoelaces, turning it into a game, her eldest giggling as they made silly faces at each other, I felt the edges of my heart begin to soften, the tension of my earlier doubts easing just a little. For so long, I had been an outsider in their world, fumbling through interactions with awkwardness, feeling like I was always one step behind in terms of affection. I sipped my drink, pretending to keep up with the adult conversations around me while stealing glances at my niece and nephew, watching them scramble for toys, their joy palpable. It was exhausting trying to figure out where I fit in, but with each chuckle that escaped their lips, I began to see pieces of myself reflected back at me, children thriving in their small universe of imagination. I leaned back in my chair and tried to enjoy the noise, the clattering of Legos on the floor and the hum of animated discussions about superheroes. "Hey, Auntie! Look at this!" My niece suddenly popped up beside me, clutching a crumpled piece of paper covered in colorful scribbles. She was beaming, her eyes sparkling with pride. "I made this just for you." I took the paper from her hands, the vibrant colors swirling chaotically across the page. It was an abstract masterpiece, a jumble of shapes that could be anything from rainbows to monsters. I felt a surge of affection, not because I was suddenly head over heels for her or fulfilling a norm of being the doting aunt, but because I saw her. I saw how hard she had worked to create something for me, to share a piece of her world, and that was something to cherish. "Wow! I love it." I grinned wider than I had in weeks. Her face lit up like a Christmas tree, and in that instant, I knew this small exchange was a step forward, not a leap, but still something. I felt a stir of belonging that was heavy with imperfections. I looked over to my sister, and for a brief moment, our glances locked. Her smile was knowing, a shared acknowledgement of the work both of us were putting into our relationships. As the night progressed, I began to breathe a little easier, my laughter joining the cacophony of voices, allowing myself to be swept up in the nuances of family life. For several more hours, we huddled together around a mess of dinner plates, overflowed drinks, and overwhelmed conversations. When I left that night, I felt lighter than I had in ages. It was still going to be a long road. I wasn't naive enough to think that everything would magically change overnight. But I found solace in understanding that I didn't need to love my sister's children the way she did, just my version of love, whatever that might look like, was perfectly valid. Perhaps love could be like this beautiful mess we'd created that night, a patchwork of doodles, varied textures, shades, and overlapping lines. Weeks turned into months, and as the holidays approached, I couldn't shake the sense of change that lingered in the air. I started offering to babysit occasionally, wanting to break through the barrier of unfamiliarity that had once made me feel like an outsider. I found myself emerging from my shell, directing silly puppet shows with mismatched socks, playing hide and seek in the corners of their home, and reading story after story until nap time was unavoidable. Each time I returned home, I would hang up my coat and find a small piece of my newfound warmth nestling in the pocket, a token of connection I didn't realize I was building. Looking back on that conversation with my sister, I realized how important it was for her too. She'd carved out space for me to be precisely who I was, without any expectations of perfection. It was in the little moments, the fleeting glances and shared laughter, that love unveiled itself in new forms. Perhaps we all could lean into our uncertainties, knowing that something beautiful could stem from the chaos, the imperfections, and the undying effort to bridge gaps, one family dinner, and one awkward exchange, at a time. I still think about that night occasionally, especially when I spy my niece decorating another crayon masterpiece, or my nephew zooming around with a superhero cape flapping in the wind. Love is like a starting point on a canvas, it unfolds endlessly, and I'm beginning to understand that being part of their world is just as special as creating my own path too. And in this ongoing journey, I'm learning to embrace the surprises and to keep the dialogue open, because maybe it's in the imperfections that we find the most authentic forms of connection. So, look, I never thought I'd find myself in a situation like this. I'm a single parent to a quirky 7-year-old named Lily, and life is already a bit chaotic as it is, balancing work and school schedules while ensuring my kid has a stable home environment. For the most part, I've tried to keep things light and flowing. But then there's my Aunt Claire, bless her heart, who's always had this knack for pushing my buttons. She's one of those well-meaning relatives who just can't help but give unsolicited advice, and a lot of it revolves around how I'm raising Lily. Everything from what she eats to how I let her express herself creatively, which includes glitter, a lot of glitter. Recently, we had a family gathering for my brother's birthday, and it felt like Aunt Claire was on a mission. I could see her shooting judgmental glances my way whenever she thought Lily was being too loud or too independent, like a hawk stalking its prey. Finally, when she suggested I should take Lily's art supplies away because she thought they were too messy, something inside me just snapped. I remember looking at her, my palms sweaty, and saying something like, "Aunt Claire, if you can't respect my decisions as a parent, then maybe it's best if Lily doesn't come over anymore." The room fell silent, and I instantly regretted saying it, even as the words left my mouth. I could see the shock on her face, and I immediately felt a wave of guilt wash over me. Was I overreacting? Was I really okay with cutting my kid off from one of the few safe spaces she had, just to make a stand? I could almost hear my aunt's heart breaking, but it wasn't just her heartbreak that weighed on me. I felt the burden of being the bad guy in my own family story. I tossed and turned that night, replaying the confrontation in my head, grappling with feelings of anger directed toward Aunt Claire for being so critical, and guilt for possibly taking something away from Lily that she enjoyed. A few days later, she called me, voice trembling, to ask if we could have a chat. When we met, I could tell she was hurt, but she quickly shifted gears to talking about how she feels she's just looking out for Lily. I snapped back like a rubber band. "I'm doing the best I can. If you feel that I'm not, then don't come around." After that, I felt awful, but also strangely liberated. My responsibility is to Lily, to protect her joy and creativity. Weeks passed without Aunt Claire, and honestly, Lily asked about her once or twice, but I brushed it off, trying to maintain a brave front. Then the real kicker happened. I overheard Lily talking to her friend about how she didn't want to go to Aunt Claire's house anyway because adults should let kids be kids. In that moment, I felt a strange mix of pride and sorrow, and I knew something had shifted. I kept reflecting on whether it was worth it to stand my ground, and while I missed the idea of family dinners and the warmth they brought, I realized my first priority is protecting my daughter from unrealistic expectations. Time marched on, and eventually, Aunt Claire reached out to see if we could start fresh, possibly meet up for donuts at our favorite bakery. I hesitated but texted back, "Let's try." I still don't know if I'm entirely ready to forgive, but as I write this, I feel hopeful. Maybe we could learn to communicate better, create a new understanding. Who knows? Maybe even my Aunt Claire will learn that sometimes, love means letting go a little. So where does that leave me? Honestly, still a little unsure but standing firm in my convictions. AITA? I guess it's all part of this messy parenting journey. As I sat in my tiny kitchen, steam swirling up from the coffee mug cradled between my palms, I couldn't shake the mix of apprehension and anticipation that clung to me after Claire's message. It felt like pulling on an old sweater that I used to adore but had somehow forgotten the fit of. I replayed our last encounter over and over in my head. My mind flickered back to the confrontation at my son's birthday party, the glares exchanged over the toppings for the cake. "It's gluten-free, Aunt Claire, because Danny has a sensitivity," I had said, trying to keep my voice steady as she argued that I was being overprotective. Every word of my conviction had been met with a wave of indignation from her, a woman who had once been my confidant, my ally in navigating the familial chaos. I couldn't help but feel the weight of disappointment settle on my shoulders like a heavy cloak. Yes, Aunt Claire had always been a source of wisdom, her stories rich with familial lore, but somewhere along the way, respect for my parenting decisions had dissolved into a pile of unsolicited advice and judgment. So here I was, contemplating a meetup that could potentially heal old wounds while still feeling the prick of betrayal. When I agreed to try, it felt like I was tiptoeing back to a place I used to know, a place that felt welcoming yet dangerous. Would this conversation lead to understanding or reignite old arguments? Would it be a stepping stone towards rebuilding or just another attempt to bulldoze my boundaries? My phone buzzed on the table, jolting me from my thoughts. It was a reminder pinging me about the donut date. This wasn't just coffee with a friend, it involved family dynamics that felt more complicated than navigating a labyrinth blindfolded. The clatter of my son's toys in the background momentarily distracted me, grounding me in my role as a mother, the constant evaluator of who gets to influence my child's life. I took a deep breath, reminding myself that parenting is as much about creating a safe space for my son as it is about ensuring he understands the nuances of relationships. The next morning, I found myself outside our favorite bakery, the scent of warm pastries flooding my senses. Claire was already there when I arrived, her coffee in hand, her expression a strange mix of hopeful and apologetic. "Hey," I said softly, an uncertain smile creeping on my face. She looked a bit older, perhaps weighed down by life's burdens or the realization, possibly, that she had crossed lines. We chatted about the usual, the weather, what a rainstorm had done to our childhood tree fort, but there it was, lingering beneath the surface, that tension between what I hoped we could be and the reality of our strained relationship. "I know I haven't been the best aunt," Claire said, her eyes fixed on the donut display like she was trying to find the right words hiding among the pastries. I wanted to believe her, to embrace this moment, but doubt bubbled within me. It's hard for me to see you navigate parenting. I feel like I have so much to offer, but maybe it's not what you want." Her honesty was refreshing yet disarming, and I found myself wrestling with the desire to let her back into my life, while also keeping my son out of the line of fire. "I appreciate that, Claire," I replied, my heart racing. "But it's crucial for me to set boundaries, especially for Danny's sake. I want him to grow up feeling safe and understood, not under scrutiny." As I spoke, I registered the flicker of realization in her eyes, a softened understanding. We spent the next hour unpacking the layers of our relationship, trying to navigate what love looks like when respect feels fragile. I shared my experiences as a single parent, how the choices I made were never arbitrary but deeply considered, always revolving around my child's well-being. And to my surprise, Claire listened, really listened. I caught moments where her expression shifted from defensiveness to contemplation, as if she was beginning to grasp that our love might need to take on a different shape. We hugged before parting ways, an uncertain but genuine gesture. As I drove home, a sense of cautious optimism filled me. It felt like we had planted the seeds for a new beginning, though I knew they would take time to grow. Would she fully respect my parenting choices? Only time would tell. After all, trust is like a delicate flower, it takes patience to bloom again after being trampled. That evening, as Danny clambered onto my lap for story time, I felt the warmth of possibility surrounding us. Sure, I was still a little unsure, still grappling with the anxiety that came with family dynamics, but I felt lighter. AITA? Maybe in someone's narrative, but in mine, it felt more like I was pushing through the chaos, determined to carve out our peace. I sighed contentedly, holding my son tighter, hoping both Claire and I were learning that forgiveness is often found in the spaces between boundaries and bravery. That evening, as we sat on the couch with the soft light from a nearby lamp casting a gentle glow around us, I couldn't help but marvel at how sweetly innocent Danny was. He squirmed a bit, all too eager to dive into his favorite story. "Mom, read me the one with the dragon," he chirped, his little arms flapping with excitement. I grinned, the kind of smile that muscles in your face almost forget how to make until a moment like this brings it back. I pulled him closer, the sweet smell of his freshly washed hair drifting upward, wrapping around us like a comforting blanket. It was magical how one little creature had the power to transform a tumultuous day into something warm and bright, yet deep down, I still felt that twinge of unease about Claire. It's funny how life has this way of testing your limits. After our spat, I had launched into a whirlwind of introspection, replaying every argument, every well-meaning but misguided advice she'd offered, as if retracing my steps might uncover the right answer. Understanding what I wanted from our relationship was one hurdle, but keeping Danny safe from the fallout felt like climbing a mountain in stilettos. I felt at that moment, cradling the little joy in my arms, that he was my best shot at a serene future. As we settled into the story, Danny clapped and giggled at the silly voices I used for the characters. I couldn't help but feel a flicker of fear. What if Claire, in her stubbornness, couldn't respect my boundaries again? I wanted my son to grow without the weight of adult conflicts pressing down on him. The heavy thought stuck with me like a burr under my skin. When I put him to bed later, I stood in the doorway watching him drift off, the soft rhythm of his breathing echoing back to me the peacefulness I wished for our family. My phone buzzed, breaking the silence, and I nearly jumped, pulling it from my pocket. Claire was texting again. A simple message this time, thinking about that donut date. "Do you think we can get it right this time?" I stared at the screen, my heart ambivalent, caught somewhere between wanting to build bridges and fearing the crumbling of foundations. I typed and deleted, before finally settling on a cautious, "I hope so. But there are some things we need to discuss first." I hit send, a mixture of hopeful optimism and drumming dread billowing inside me. The next morning, I sipped my coffee, staring out the window, the soft rays illuminating the world outside. I thought about how the hardest conversations often end up being the most crucial. Finding a balance between love, boundaries, and forgiveness, it felt less like a checklist and more like a dance. A complicated one. When our donut date rolled around, I wore a smile that only half masked my nervousness. Danny sat beside me, oblivious to the underlying currents, munching on a glazed treat and occasionally dipping into my plate for the sprinkles. Claire arrived, and as she walked through the bakery door, I saw a hint of the old warmth in her eyes, but behind it lay uncertainty. I took a deep breath, reminding myself of the patience that comes with healing. "Hey," I said softly, breaking the ice as we settled into a booth. "I believe in giving this a second shot. But we need some ground rules." "What are you talking about?" she responded, a hint of confusion in her voice, her brow wrinkling. I felt my heart race as I tried to articulate what I had been mulling over for weeks. "It's just, when it comes to Danny, I need you to respect my decisions as a parent." The weight of my words hung heavy in the air, shifting the mood between us. Claire's expression wavered, shifting from surprise to contemplation. "I understand. I think I've been stubborn about how I view things, and maybe it's time for a new perspective," she eventually admitted, reaching for a napkin as if to wipe away unspoken tension. As we talked, nibbling on donuts and sipping coffee, a sort of thaw took place. We laid raw feelings on the table, sharing our histories and misunderstandings, each crumb of pastry like a building block toward repairing our fractured relationship. I could see that she genuinely wanted to make amends, but the real test would be in her actions moving forward. Later, outside the bakery, Danny bounced ahead of us, trailing his fingers along the brick wall and giggling as he tried to capture every shadow cast by the trees overhead. In that moment, witnessing his innocent joy, I turned to Claire and said, "Thank you for showing up today." "Thank you for giving me the chance," she replied, her voice softer, more genuine. "I really want to be a part of his life, our lives, but I promise I will respect the boundaries you've set." As we parted ways, I felt a mixture of relief and apprehension swirling through me. Maybe I had been too cautious in some ways, but I didn't think I was the villain of this story. I was just a mom trying to carve out a safe and loving space for her son while balancing the complexities of family entanglements. I hugged Danny a little tighter as we walked home, whispering to him that life is often imperfect but always worth navigating together. As he chattered away about his favorite dragon stories, I realized that even when it feels chaotic, there's beauty and growth, both in ourselves and in relationships. So, was I the asshole? Maybe to some, but in this chapter of my life, as messy as it was, I was simply doing my best to foster love and understanding. The journey was still unfolding, but I felt ready for what came next, embracing the hope that blooms even in the darkest corners. I always thought family meant sticking together no matter what, but here I was, standing on the brink of not attending my sister's wedding, and it felt like a betrayal. My sister, Alyssa, had been planning her big day for over a year, and I could see how excited she was about every little detail. But as the date drew nearer, I learned the venue wasn't accessible. For someone who's been in a wheelchair since a car accident a decade ago, it was more than just a minor inconvenience, it felt like a punch to the gut. I vividly remember sitting in my living room, laptop on my lap, scrolling through pictures of the beautiful estate Alyssa had chosen with its sweeping staircases and narrow doorways. I couldn't help but wonder if she had ever envisioned a day when her older brother would be trapped outside, missing the one moment I knew she'd dreamed about since she could barely walk. I tried to shake off the knot tightening in my stomach, convincing myself I could find a way around it. Maybe I could watch the ceremony on video or have someone FaceTime me from the venue. But what kind of brother would I be if I chose to observe from a distance? That thought gnawed at me, pulling at the very fabric of my identity. I wrestled with an internal conflict, feeling a whirlwind of emotions, anger towards my sister for not ensuring the venue was accessible, guilt for even considering not going, and bitterness towards my circumstances, as if they were dragging me into a corner away from being part of the family. I finally picked up my phone, my heart racing as I dialed her number. When she answered, there was a brightness in her voice that made my heart ache. "I can't wait for you to see everything, it's going to be perfect," she exclaimed, and I could almost picture her twirling around in excitement. "About that," I stumbled, my voice thick, and I felt a wave of nausea crash over me as I explained the accessibility issues. There was a loaded silence on the other end before Alyssa's tone shifted. "I didn't think to check. I'm so sorry, I thought it would work," she said, and I could tell she was genuinely upset. I didn't want her day ruined or for her to feel guilty when she shouldn't. "You should still go," I found myself insisting, my throat tight. I just don't know if I can be there and not actually be there, you know?" I hung up feeling like I just dropped an emotional bomb. The days ticked by, and the wedding loomed like a shadow over me. I could picture her in her stunning gown, surrounded by smiling friends and family, while I would be left questioning my place in it all. A week before the wedding, Alyssa called again, her voice more subdued. "Is there any way you can come?" I've been looking into portable ramps and maybe we can figure this out. As sweet as her intentions were, the thought of making her scramble at the last minute felt like yet another weight on her shoulders. You know what? I think it's okay if you and I just FaceTime, I suggested weakly, my heart breaking at disconnecting us in such a pivotal moment. I love you, Alyssa, but I don't want to be a distraction. The day of the wedding, I dressed up and sat in front of my laptop, fighting back tears as the first chords of the wedding march filled my living room. I could almost feel the warmth of the sun streaming through the trees at the venue and hear the cheers of family members rejoicing. Alyssa looked beautiful, glowing in her gown, but as I raised my hand to wave hello, my heart felt heavier than it ever had. After the ceremony, as I watched my sister laugh and dance, a small part of me felt anger bubbling to the surface, anger at the world for shutting me out, and a bigger part, a sort of bittersweet acceptance, knowing that this was my reality. I realized that distancing myself from the family wasn't the answer, no matter how much it stung. Sure, Alyssa hadn't thought through the accessibility, but she loved me, and that love didn't hinge on the staircases I couldn't climb. As I shut my laptop after the final toast, I felt a mixture of regret and relief. I hadn't been there in person, but in some way, our bond remained intact. Months later, she and I would go to lunch, and in between bites of sweet potato fries, she slipped a note across the table, an invitation to help choose the venue for her renewal of vows in a few years. I promise it'll be accessible, this time, she winked. And just like that, through all the twists and turns, I found a glimmer of hope that we could advance together, step by step, no matter the distance life put between us. As I sat across from her, the smell of garlic aioli mingling with the warm spring air, I realized how much I had missed moments like this, just the two of us laughing and reminiscing. The sweet potato fries felt like a bridge over the gap that had grown during our years of silence. My sister had always been the one with boundless energy, pulling me along on adventures I never asked for but ended up loving. I remembered all the times I had wheeled alongside her through bustling city streets and quiet parks, her laughter echoing in my ears while my wheelchair was simply a part of the scenery. But then came the wedding, a day that should have been filled with joy, turned into a painful reminder of our differences and the rift that widened with each turn of the planning while she embarked upon without considering my needs. It hadn't been just a physical divide, it had felt like an emotional chasm, one that I feared might never be bridged. When she slipped that note across the table, my heart did a little skip, but I also felt the weight of uncertainty. Could we truly move forward? I stared at the invitation, the elegant script of her handwriting unspooling memories of our childhood, twilight backyard adventures, late-night conversations, and the little secrets we whispered as we tucked ourselves into bed, feeling invincible. I chuckled softly at the graphics she'd sketched. In the margins, twisting shapes of flowers and stars that looked more like a childhood doodle than a wedding concept. So where do we start? I finally asked, my voice betraying the mix of excitement and caution churning inside me. She squeezed her brown eyes in that way she did when she was gleeful, a sign that we were on the same page again. How about the beach? I've always wanted to say I do with the waves crashing behind me. As the conversation flowed, the ideas poured out like a refreshing tide, bringing warmth and a sense of renewal I hadn't realized I was longing for. We drew sketches on napkins, imagined colors that would drip down the canvas of our memories. The sun illuminated our laughter, and for the first time in what felt like ages, I could feel the spark of our bond rekindling. Yet, the doubt lingered in the back of my mind, a quiet reminder that we still had hurdles to overcome. Months passed as we wove through planning meetings, and as my sister pursued her dream, I cheered her on, yet my heart was a mixture of elation and lingering anxiety. How would she react when the spotlight shifted to the accessibility concerns again? Would we be able to mesh our visions, the grandeur of her dream wedding with the stark reality of my needs? I can't help but think of how the last few years had unfolded. The push and pull of our lives seemed like an intricate dance, one where we stepped in and out of sync. Then, the day finally arrived for the venue tour, and the stakes felt immeasurable. With each step closer to the location, my heart raced, anticipation wrapping around me like a comforter. This was a chance for us, not just for her, but for us as sisters. We pulled up to the beach venue, the soft sound of waves greeting us. She hopped out excitedly, taking in the scenery, and my heart tightened with a mixture of hope and dread. "What do you think?" she called back, her voice cutting through the salty breeze. I looked at the row of steps leading to the beautiful sandy stretch, and a lump formed in my throat. "It has to be accessible," I replied, my voice shaky as I formulated the words. There was a pause, then she turned back, her expression transforming from joy to concern. The realization hung between us, a flimsy thread ready to snap. "I didn't even think about that," she admitted softly. I felt a wave of frustration crash over me, but there was something in the way she looked at me, regret mixed with determination. "Let's make sure that it is," I said, grounding her back into the conversation. "What matters is that we celebrate your love, and no one should have to limit themselves based on perceived barriers." As we spent the afternoon discussing every detail from ramps to seating arrangements, I could feel that earlier tension melting away. She listened, genuinely wanting my input, and by the end of it, there was a sense of unity, a reaffirmation that we were partners in this journey. And as I wheeled down the ramp they reluctantly agreed to install, gentle sunlight spilling over us, I couldn't help but feel that we were building something reliable. A relationship that allowed for both of our anxieties and ambitions, stretching into the future like the horizon before us. We were stumbling into a new chapter, and in that moment, every step she took toward inclusivity felt as powerful as the waves crashing behind us, paving the way for us to finally come together. As we rolled away from the fluttering banners and the sound of laughter behind us, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. It was the end of one intense chapter and the hopeful beginning of another. The sun cast a golden glow on the pavement, and every part of me ached to believe that we had finally moved past the doubts and strange tensions that had once defined our relationship. Our lunch promise, nestled between bites of sweet potato fries, felt like a pact, a blend of growth and understanding that I hadn't been sure we'd ever reach. We spent those early days after the wedding navigating each other's perspectives, developing a rhythm that suited both of us. Sarah, ever the planner, wanted to ensure that what had once felt limiting now blossomed into opportunities. I'd go through design magazines stacked on her coffee table, filling the spaces with doodles of accessible moments, visualizations of love and laughter shared across barrier-free tables. Choosing hues and fabrics that spoke to our personalities became a habit we cherished. I'd watch her eyes light up whenever she pitched new ideas, and each time my heart swelled more than the last. One evening, while we sat on her porch adorned with string lights, I shared my fears about everything that had transpired, the doubts that still occasionally crept into my knotted stomach. "What if this is just a moment?" I asked, nervousness inching into my voice. "What if we fall back into old patterns?" She laid her hand across mine, and warmth surged through me as she searched my eyes. "It's just the beginning. We're wiser now, right? We won't ignore our differences, we'll embrace them." It struck me how easily she spun my concerns into threads of commitment, weaving our different experiences into something sturdy. Months rolled on, and those gatherings became pivotal. Each event we attended, every meeting with friends, felt like practice. I learned where the gaps in conversations widened and where certain remarks stuck, and Sarah mirrored my growth with palpable enthusiasm. It was strangely exhilarating, a slow dance of vulnerability and strength. We'd share a laugh or a sidelong glance while standing in a circle of friends, our unspoken connection creating everything from an inside joke to the safety of conversation. After a year of navigating through life together, Sarah proposed we host a weekend retreat for family and friends, another venue on the horizon. This time, she meticulously scouted accessible cabins in the hills, poring over pictures and reviews. I argued that they felt too rustic, but she shrugged it off with that charm I'd come to adore. "It's about creating memories, not fitting a mold. We can have fun anywhere." As the retreat weekend approached, I felt those familiar jitters rise. What if things unraveled? What if the old resentments resurfaced? But as friends streamed into the cozy cabin and laughter overshadowed my worries, I felt the sweetness of our hard work settle around us like a hug. Sarah didn't flinch when someone knocked their drink, spilling it across the floor. She smiled, pulled me closer, and called for towels. We adapt. In those little moments, I recognized just how much we had evolved, no longer sidestepping anything difficult. We faced it head on, laughing about mishaps, sharing stories late into the night. As everyone gathered around the campfire, roasting marshmallows and sharing ghost stories, I leaned back, soothed by the crackling flames. The weathered cabin surrounded us felt strong, just like our bond. There was something beautifully imperfect about building our new reality together, one where glances spoke volumes and where every shared experience was a step forward, however small. I could feel the roots of our relationship deepening, intertwining, much like the intertwining branches of the trees around us, and with it came a promise that neither of us would ever stop trying to understand. When Sarah caught my eye and raised her marshmallow-coated stick, I realized that this was more than a moment, it was a commitment, a radiant journey forged through respect and love. It wasn't just about getting things right, it was about creating the space to be wrong, to grow, and together, soar against any odds. I squeezed her hand, my heart whispering words of gratitude, knowing that our story was still unfolding beautifully, in ways neither of us could predict. I never thought changing my last name would become such a complicated endeavor, but here I am, sitting in my dimly lit room, grappling with the aftermath of my impulsive decision. Growing up in a small town, my family name was more of a burden than a badge of honor. Our lineage was steeped in a history I never felt proud of. Rumors of our family's past mistakes always hung in the air like an uninvited guest. The moment I turned 18, I began to imagine what life might be like if I severed that last thread connecting me to a family whose values felt increasingly misaligned with my own. Months passed, and the thoughts lingered like a persistent whisper until one day, I finally took the plunge. I went to the courthouse and, with a mix of adrenaline and fear, filed the paperwork to change my last name to something that truly resonated with who I am, something bright, something hopeful. I chose Lark, inspired by the bird that symbolizes joy and the promise of a new beginning. This choice felt exhilarating, liberating even, but revealing this change to my family was daunting. So, I decided to keep it a secret for a little while longer, thinking I could break the news gently when the time felt right. I figured it wouldn't matter much as I'd already distanced myself from the family, only attending gatherings out of obligation. But then the family reunion rolled around, and my heart raced. As we sat around the long table, passing dishes filled with food that had always been a comfort, I felt like a ghost among them. Amid the laughter and familial banter, my cousin casually mentioned how proud he was of the family name, and I felt a sting in my chest. The room fell silent as everyone looked at me, waiting for my response, and in a moment of panic, I quietly excused myself and slipped out into the cool evening air. The conflict brewed in my mind. Was I truly an asshole for wanting to distance myself from a name that felt like a weight? Yet, the guilt gnawed at me like I had committed a crime. After a few days of more silence than I could bear, my mother reached out, concerned, of course, because that's what mothers do. She mentioned how much family meant to her and implied that my secret was like a rift forming between us. I hesitated before replying, my heart thundering as I considered confessing my change. What if they didn't understand? What if they took it personally? Fearing their judgment, I delayed my response and instead found solace in writing in my journal. Here I was, torn between the identity I wanted and the family that seemed to value tradition above all else. Days turned into weeks, and the reunion lingered in my mind, festering more doubts than answers, until one day, I noticed a family group chat buzzing with old photos, laughter, and news updates. Against my better judgment, curiosity got the better of me. I peeked in, half expecting to feel even more disconnected, but instead found myself smiling at the memories being shared. Then I saw a message pop up from my sister, talking about how much she missed me and how family is everything, even when it feels overwhelming. At that moment, I realized I could have it all, my new identity and my family. I took a deep breath and typed my confession into the group chat, heart racing. Hey, everyone. I just wanted to share something important. I changed my last name. I clicked send before I could overthink it. The response was a mix of shock, confusion, and finally, a lot of love. They asked why, and there was this wave of relief when I explained how I felt. It was a risk, but suddenly their support washed over me like a warm tide. You're still our Lark, my brother texted, and just like that, I wasn't the outsider I had feared I'd be. Families are messy, complicated, and sometimes taken for granted, and maybe I was a bit of an asshole for not being upfront, but in the end, it turned out okay. I realized we could adapt, grow, and reshape our connections. My past didn't need to define me, it could simply be a part of who I was becoming. As I lay down that night, I felt lighter, like I had finally opened a window to let the stale air out. It was a long journey ahead to reconcile my past with my present, but the thought of finally being myself gave me a good kind of hope. As I lay there, that new sense of freedom wrapping around me like a warm blanket, I couldn't shake the feeling that I might have awakened something in my family too. I fell asleep with hopes dancing in my head, hopes that they would understand my decision and that this would spark conversations we'd all been too afraid to have. The next morning, I woke up early, fueled by a mix of anxiety and excitement. I brewed a pot of coffee, the smell filling the tiny kitchen, and didn't even bother to change out of my pajamas. With my new last name emblazoned in my mind, I sat down and opened my laptop, gingerly typing a message to my family group chat, my fingers trembling slightly with each keystroke. Hey everyone, I wanted to let you know I've legally changed my last name. I hope you can support me through this. At first, the response was eerily quiet. I could almost hear the collective gasp. I could picture my mom dropping her coffee mug, my dad raising an eyebrow, and my sister, always the upbeat comedian, leaving some sarcastic quip about identity crises. But instead, the silence hung there like fog, thick and suffocating. 5 minutes passed, and my heart raced as I began to think that maybe this was a bigger deal than I had anticipated. Just as I was about to convince myself to delete the message, my phone pinged. It was my sister. Whoa, surprise. I didn't see that coming. But, why? You could have just told us. The floodgates opened after that. My mom chimed in with a cautious, "You know we love you for who you are, right? This feels sudden." And then my dad, with his usual no-nonsense attitude, asked the question I was bracing for: what's wrong with our name? Why not just stick with it? Each message sent another wave of guilt crashing over me. I felt like I was unraveling. All the excitement I had felt just hours before was morphing into the lump of shame sitting in my throat. I explained my reasoning, trying to articulate my desire to break free from family ties that felt more like shackles than support. I reminisced about the hurt and confusion of the past, the inescapable truth that my identity felt like a puzzle with missing pieces. I wrote about how that old name dragged behind me like a ghost. Eventually, the conversation took a different turn. My sister revealed her struggles with our family's expectations, admitting she's always felt like she needed to be the good daughter instead of simply being herself. Even my dad softened, sharing a moment from his own youth when he felt suffocated by his lineage and the pressure to uphold the family name. Those walls began to chip away, and I could almost see fragments of my family emerging from the shadows. Conversations turned more thoughtful, less accusatory. "How can we support you?" came from my mom, and I felt swells of gratitude. We talked for a few hours, unpacking old wounds, stories I assumed were lost. We were no longer a lineage of names and expectations. We became individuals, interconnected but separate, just like the branches of a tree. Each of us unique in our own right while grounded by a shared history. I sat back, amazed at the transformations happening right within our little group chat. It shifted something deeper in my soul. This newfound openness, this blooming understanding of one another, felt like the first rays of sunlight piercing through the long-held clouds above our family. As I scrolled through the messages later that evening, I realized changing my last name was never about erasing my past, it was about reshaping my identity. I fell asleep the next night without the heaviness I had carried for so long. To be clear, the journey ahead wouldn't be without its bumps. Old habits die hard, and months of conversation and growth remain ahead of us. But as I drifted off again, I felt ready for whatever lay ahead, taking my first steps without the burden of my old name pulling me down. It was liberating, like finally taking a deep breath after holding my breath for far too long. Maybe I wasn't the asshole after all. Maybe I was just a person learning how to live authentically, and in that, I found peace. The next morning felt different. The sunlight streamed through my window, illuminating the dust particles dancing in the air, and I could almost hear a quiet celebration in the world outside. I stared at the ceiling for a moment, allowing the shadows from the leaves of the oak tree outside to create an intricate pattern, something abstract and beautiful, kind of like the life I was slowly beginning to carve out for myself. I got up and went about my usual routine, but the lingering tendrils of doubt still tugged at me. I knew that while I was embracing this new chapter, my family wasn't quite on the same page yet. I decided to meet with my sister, Hannah, later that day. We'd shared so many laughs and secrets growing up, and I wanted her to be part of this transformation, but the anxiety bubbled up inside. What would she think? Would my choice come off as selfish? I found myself fidgeting with my phone, the screen lighting up with her name as I hesitated to dial. Eventually, I took a deep breath and sent her a text, asking if she'd like to get lunch. She replied within moments, almost too eagerly, and I felt the knot in my stomach twist tighter. The cafe was our little haven, nestled on the corner of our old neighborhood. It had the same vintage charm, the worn leather seats making every conversation feel intimate. We ordered our usual, a club sandwich for me, a wrap for her, and I tried to feign nonchalance, but Hannah saw right through me. "You seem different," she said, biting into her wrap, her eyes narrowing in that way they did when she was genuinely curious. "Yeah, well, I guess you could say I've been doing some soul searching," I replied, trying to put on a brave face. "What do you mean?" she pressed, her expression shifting from playful to concerned. I took another sip of my iced tea, gathering my thoughts. "You know how I changed my last name?" I started, cautiously wading into the topic. Her eyebrows shot up, and I could see the gears turning in her mind. "I've been thinking a lot about who I am and who I want to be. It's like shedding an old skin that never really fit me. Hannah nodded slowly, and I couldn't tell if she was processing my words or if the wrapping paper from her lunch had taken her by surprise. I get that, she said finally, but why not tell anyone? Like, it feels secretive? I wish I had known sooner. Her words pierced through me. I opened my mouth to explain, to defend my choice, but I realized I didn't have a solid answer. I guess I was scared, I admitted, the words bubbling up like a confession. I didn't want the burden of others' expectations, or their judgment. It was about taking my life back from the shadows of my past. The silence that followed felt heavy, like gravity itself was trying to pull down the weight of our family's history. Hannah looked out the window, watching the way the people passed, lost in their own worlds. You know, I've always been in your corner. I didn't want you to fight this battle alone. Her voice was soft, but it resonated deep within me. I suddenly felt a well of emotions welling up, gratitude, guilt, love. I know, and I appreciate that more than you realize, I replied, reaching out to squeeze her hand. We both sat in that moment, the air around us charged with new possibilities and the realization that the change wouldn't just affect me, it reverberated through all of us. As we finished lunch, the conversation shifted, reflecting a warm future rather than a burdensome past. We would rebuild our family dynamics, step by step, reshaping our identities together. By the time the plates were cleared and we stepped out into the sunlight, it felt like an invisible chain had loosened. I left the cafe feeling lighter once again, perhaps like a phoenix rising from ashes I didn't even know weighed me down before. Sure, I hadn't told everyone up front, and maybe that made me a bit of an asshole. It wasn't perfect, and bumps would surely come as we navigated this new chapter of our family story. But that day, I felt something profound, the acceptance that part of moving forward meant confronting the past, together, not in spite of it. Later that evening, I received a text from my mom, simply saying, "Can we talk?" The slight tremor of anxiety twisted in my stomach again. I wasn't ready for this. But, with a newfound strength coursing through me, I realized it was time. Time to be honest, time to embrace the tangled web of our history. A spark of hope flickered within me again, and I prepared to unravel the secret I had thought would never see the light of day. Maybe by braving this conversation, I could invite others into my liberation, and maybe that would make the journey worth it. I still can't believe what happened at my house last week. I live in a small, quiet neighborhood. My home is my sanctuary. It's where I unwind after long days at the office, where I bake my famous chocolate chip cookies, and where the peace of mind comes from knowing I'm in control of my space. When I bought this place, it was just me, and I loved it for that reason. But lately, things have been shifting. It all started on a breezy Saturday afternoon. I was in my kitchen, humming under my breath while the sweet smell of vanilla and melting chocolate wafted through the air. There was a knock at my door, nothing unusual, perhaps a neighbor, or maybe even a delivery. When I opened it, there stood a woman, early 30s, hair pulled back in an impatient ponytail, and beside her was a little girl, maybe 6, with muddy shoes and a candy-stained shirt. "Hi. Sorry to bother you, I live just a block down and I'm in a bit of a bind," the mom said, her eyes darting nervously. Right away, something felt off. I had a million things to do, and my instinct was to politely decline, but instead, I just stood there listening. She explained that her car had broken down and she needed to wait for a friend to pick her up. Could they just stay for a little while? Now, I know what you're thinking, what's the harm in offering a couple of strangers a place to hang out momentarily? But as she talked, the unease grew in my stomach. I was imagining the crumbs and chaos her child might bring into my pristine living room, which I had just tidied up. Still, I let them in. As soon as they crossed the threshold, the girl dashed to my potted plants and began poking around, while her mother plopped on my pristine couch, checking her phone like it was a ticking clock. The tension started to rise in me, but I balanced on the edge of playing gracious host and keeping my sanity intact. "Please don't disturb that," I warned gently, watching the little girl tug at the leaves, only to be met with a vacant stare from the mom who barely looked up. It felt like an age passed, and I tried engaging them in small talk, yet the responses were vague at best. Time crawled, and I was just about ready to ask them to leave when chaos erupted. The girl, now bored, had turned her attention to my art supplies, scattering everything all over the table with gleeful shouts. Her mother was still glued to her phone. I could feel that simmering frustration escalate to a boil. Finally, with all the control I could muster, I shouted, "Get out. Both of you. You cannot just come into someone's house and act like you own the place." My voice echoed through the hallway as if summoning the spirits of past homeowners who would disapprove of such a scene. Time halted. The mother's eyes widened in disbelief, the little girl froze mid-tugging at the nearest brush. Realizing what I had done, I felt the weight of my own rage suffocating me. It was an outburst I hadn't intended. The mom, flushed with embarrassment or anger, gathered her daughter's things, fumbling through my living room, and rushed out without a word. The echo of the door slamming shut left me shaken, and my heart raced with an unsettling mix of guilt and relief. Maybe I had overreacted. I thought about the boundaries, the slow realization of how easily someone can slip into your life and home without permission. In the days following, I was consumed with anxiety. I knew my reaction wasn't a shining example of graciousness. I was the bad guy in this scenario. Friends were mixed in their opinions when I shared the story. Some told me I should have been kinder, while others defended my right to protect my space. I didn't know which side I fell on. All I knew was it didn't feel right to let them in the first place. So, I reached out to the mother through a social media platform focused on local community connections, apologizing for my outburst and explaining how overwhelmed I had felt. To my surprise, she replied days later, saying she understood the situation. She was just as overwhelmed with her own stress. We ended up messaging back and forth a few times, even laughing about how life's chaos often spills over, especially for parents trying to manage it all. As uncomfortable as that day was, I think it brought us closer in a strange, honest way, leading me to reflect on the shared struggles we all face. Who knows, maybe next time I'll be better prepared to handle unexpected visitors, or perhaps, I'll finally be able to embrace a little bit of that chaos I once feared. I still think about that day, the strange blend of embarrassment and relief that lingered long after the dust settled. In the week that followed, my conversations with Kelsey shifted into something unexpected, a cautious friendship born from an awkward moment in my living room. We hadn't met up in person since, and honestly, even the thought of it terrified me. I had reluctantly opened my door, both to a literal visitor and to a window into a world outside my own rigid routines. I remember sitting by my kitchen window, which overlooked the busy street that once felt so far removed from my life, and watching the families hustle by. Their lives seemed so full of everything I had avoided, the noise, the laughter, the mess. I scrolled through my phone one dreary afternoon, pausing at a photo Kelsey had sent. It was of her at a park with her son, laughing over a picnic spread that they had captured mid-bite in vivid colors. The joy radiating from that shot made me ache for a connection I'd shunned for far too long. Embarking on this new, unusual friendship was shaky at first. I found myself second-guessing every text, wondering if I was bothering her. But she seemed eager to chat, her humor kept creeping in, reminding me that maybe I wasn't as hopelessly out of sync with the rest of the world as I thought. Just a couple of imperfect adults, she texted once, during one of our late-night exchanges. I chuckled, finally letting my guard down just a little. Our messages felt like little life buoys amid the turbulent waters we were both navigating. Then, 2 weeks post-chaos, Kelsey sent a message that threw me. She was planning a small barbecue for the neighborhood and suggested I come. My heart raced at the thought of being surrounded by unfamiliar faces. What if I'm the only one without kids there? I thought, battling my introverted nature. But then I remembered our last exchange, how she'd alluded to a family that might be just as overwhelmed as I was. There was an odd kind of comfort in that realization, a shared humanity and feeling lost amid our roles. Gritting my teeth, I reluctantly agreed. The day of the barbecue felt like preparing for an exam I hadn't studied for. I walked into her backyard, heart pounding, trying to steady my breath amidst the laughter and clinking of glasses. To my surprise, the atmosphere buzzed with warmth, the scent of grilled burgers wafting through the air. Kids played tag, their squeals of laughter mixing with the sounds of easy conversations. Kelsey spotted me first, and her face lit up like a beacon. "You made it," she called out, and in that moment, any anxiety I had ebbed away. Slowly, I started mingling, conversations flowing more naturally than I anticipated. I learned about the other parents and their various struggles, in parenting, in life, common experiences resonating through their stories. Their laughter reminded me how liberating it was to just be, without the confines of expectations running my day-to-day. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, painting everything in soft hues of orange and pink, I found myself chatting with a mother named Sarah, who was going through a separation. I listened to her fears echo some of my own, our conversation like a threading of kindred spirits who had weathered storms unseen to each other. I wasn't expecting this, being pulled into a collective narrative of struggle and perseverance, but it filled a void I didn't know I'd been trying to fill. When I spotted Kelsey across the yard, tending to the grill, I smiled, a silent thank you escaping my lips. Maybe at that moment, surrounded by strangers who shared the same evening light, capable of their own chaos, I realized I wasn't the only one feeling overwhelmed and isolated. I could feel the threads of connection weaving around us all, stitching us together in this weird, chaotic fabric of community. That night as I drifted to sleep, I felt lighter, unburdened from the weight I had been carrying. I thought about our original conflict and marveled at how one moment, one chaotic, unexpected moment, could unravel a tight-knit cocoon I had spun around myself and reveal the world outside. Who knows where this newfound openness would lead me? All I knew was life was messy, but perhaps it's the mess that reminded us we're all human, endlessly trying to figure it out. And maybe embracing a little chaos wasn't such a bad thing after all. The next morning, I woke up feeling oddly invigorated by my new perspective. As I sipped my coffee, the sun poured in through the kitchen windows, illuminating the chaos of my kitchen table, half-finished projects, to-do lists that seemed to multiply overnight, and crumbs from snacks I never got around to cleaning up. Instead of feeling overwhelmed, I let out a soft laugh. I noticed the beauty in the clutter, the laughter of my kids playing in the other room, and for a moment, I even found it charming. I finished my coffee and decided to embrace the unpredictability of my day. I pulled out my phone and shot a message to Sarah, the mom of the kid I'd yelled at. "Hey, I'm going to the park later with the kids. Would you like to join us?" There was a slight flutter of nerves in my stomach as I hit send, but I hoped she might appreciate the invitation. To my surprise, she responded almost immediately, her excitement palpable through the screen. "I'd love to. We could all use some fresh air." That afternoon, as I gathered the kids and packed a picnic, which, let's be honest, mainly consisted of granola bars and whatever leftovers I could scrounge, I felt that lightness from the other night creeping back in. The park was only a few blocks away, so we walked there, my kids running ahead, their laughter echoing through the neighborhood. When we reached the park, I spotted Sarah and her son, Jamie, already there, smiling and waving. She looked a touch frazzled, her hair slightly tousled, but wasn't that part of the charm? We were all in the same boat, struggling to navigate this beautiful mess called life. As the kids played, Sarah and I found ourselves on a nearby bench, sipping bottled water, and exchanging stories. We shared little victories, like managing to get both our kids to school on time and the absurdity of trying to cook dinner while juggling a million other tasks. I could feel the remnants of that chaotic day beginning to fade, replaced by a shared understanding and camaraderie. She talked about feeling alone in her journey, and it hit me hard. How often had I cloistered myself in my own worries instead of reaching out? We laughed about our moments of parenting failure, like the time she accidentally sent her daughter to school in mismatched shoes. "I thought it was a fashion statement," she joked, her eyes twinkling. Turns out it was just a mess. The ease of our conversation felt like a soothing balm. For the first time in a while, I felt like I was part of something larger, a community of fellow parents who were all just trying to figure it out while managing their own chaos. As the sun began to set and the sky turned into a canvas of oranges and pinks, I realized this was exactly the kind of connection I had been missing. It didn't matter that we'd started off on rocky ground, here we were, laughing and sharing amid our imperfections. I had learned that moments of conflict could lead to something beautiful, like the intertwining of two chaotic lives into one shared experience. We packed our things as the sky darkened, our kids, blissfully oblivious, still racing around. I looked over at Sarah, now my ally instead of an adversary, and we promised to meet again. Walking back home, I felt the chaotic fabric of community wrap itself around me a little tighter. Maybe, just maybe, this mess wasn't something to fear but something to embrace, a chaotic tapestry of hope, shared laughter, and the kind of connection that truly makes life rich. I went to bed that night feeling a sense of belonging I hadn't felt in a long time, grateful for the unpredictable journey that had brought us together. It seemed that embracing chaos had opened a door I didn't even know needed opening. I never thought I'd find myself in this situation, the kind of dilemma people share online with that dreaded "am I the asshole?" tag, but here I am, sitting at my kitchen table, staring down at an empty plate while my kids are out with their dad. It wasn't always like this. 4 years ago, when the divorce was fresh, I believed we would make co-parenting work seamlessly, share everything, communicate effectively. But reality is rarely so tidy. The kids are still adjusting, they're 10 and 8, and between soccer practice, school events, and their dad's weekend adventures, I'm always trying to figure out how best to keep their lives stable. Then came the incident last week when he decided to lay down some new rules. No more video games during the week, he told me, as if he was handing down a decree from on high. I watched my son, Jack, crush his disappointment, the seismic shift in his little body palpable, while Lily, sweet and earnest, tried to negotiate, her big eyes glimmering with hope. But Dad, what about our homework breaks? She whispered, as if reasoning with gravity. My ex simply shrugged, his way or the highway, and walked out, leaving me to deal with their fallout. My instinct was to comfort them, to explain that their dad just wanted to be responsible and that they would adjust, but part of me wondered if his expectations were fair. Later that week, I made the decision to send them to his place instead of confront him directly or enforce rules I didn't fully agree with. I figured, maybe he could lighten the burden, let him implement his own decisions without me acting as the buffer. But as soon as I drove away, a wave of guilt washed over me. Was I really giving my kids the best shot at a balanced upbringing, or was I dodging my responsibility as a parent? My phone dinged a few hours later with a text from their dad, laced with irritation. Nice of you to send them over without discussing it first. I stared at the screen and felt a ball of anxiety tighten in my throat. Despite his tone, I had hoped he might realize that I wasn't there to undermine him but to let him take the lead, something I thought he'd appreciate. But instead, all I felt was the familiar pang of fear that I was failing. What if I was just being lazy, avoiding the hard conversations we needed to have about co-parenting? Later that night, while I tucked the kids into bed, I saw what I feared most, Jack's little face crumpled up, confused over why he had to choose between Dad's rules and fun. I tried my best to comfort him, but I could sense the distance growing between us, as if the uncertainty I felt was infecting him, too. Why can't we just have fun and it be okay? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper, and it broke something inside me. What was I teaching them? That it was acceptable to pass the buck? That parenting was something to avoid? A part of me wanted to fight back and explain how harsh it could feel sometimes, yet another part feared pushing my ex further away, resulting in even more tension between us. I ended up lying awake, the weight of my choices pressing against my chest, unable to shake off the feeling that I might just be setting them up for confusion rather than a permanent solution. Days later, I received a text from my ex. He suggested a family meeting over pizza, which felt like a small olive branch, but I held my breath. It was the same dilemma looming over our heads, but it felt different now, more like a negotiation of emotional stakes than a black and white situation. Could we really move toward understanding each other's perspectives? Or were we destined to trip through mutual resentment? I still don't know how the meeting will go or if I'm the one creating divisiveness, but sitting at my table, I know it's critical to address our doubts. In the end, co-parenting might just be life's grandest mess, and I have to find a way to embrace that chaos for my kids' sake, even if it means controlling my guilt in the process. I hope to approach this journey not as two frazzled parents pulling apart but as a team willing to push through the discomfort for the sake of those innocent little faces, learning together along the way. I take a deep breath, feeling the weight of my thoughts settle on my chest like a thick blanket. The kids are at school, it's just me and the ticking clock echoing in the kitchen, reminding me of the time slipping away before this meeting with Jake. We've had our share of heated discussions, arguments flaring up like fireworks, especially when it came to our different styles of parenting. I often find myself reminiscing about the early days, before everything unraveled and the smiles faded like summer sunsets. Back then, we were a cohesive unit, a duo navigating life together. Now, it feels like we're two ships passing in the night, armed with resentment and frustration instead of compassion. I'm expecting him to come in guns blazing, ready to discuss a recent weekend incident where, in his eyes, I overstepped by allowing our kids to skip their bedtime to watch a movie. He always believed in strict routines, while I thought there was beauty in spontaneity, that sometimes we needed to let go and allow for those unplanned moments that could light up our children's eyes in ways a schedule never could. As I pour myself a cup of coffee, I wonder if this is the day he'll finally understand that not every decision needs to be a binary choice, that maybe, just maybe, we can meet in the middle. The doorbell rings, and my heart races. It's showtime. I open the door, and Jake stands there, hands shoved deep in his pockets, a slight crease lining his brow, a clear sign that today won't be easy. "Hey," he says, his voice even, albeit laced with tension. I can tell we're both straddling a tightrope of unspoken words. "Hi," I reply, trying to inject some warmth into the air, but it feels like I'm pushing against a brick wall. We settle at the table, the same one where we once celebrated birthdays and anniversaries, now a battleground for our parental philosophies. "Let's just get this over with," he says, a hint of exhaustion in his already weary tone. I nod, swallowing my pride, yet desperate to convey that my intention is not to undermine him but to seek a solution that serves the kids instead. As we dive into the conversation, I explain my perspective, emphasizing that those moments of joy, like movie nights, are precious. But they need structure, Michelle, Jake counters, running a hand through his hair, a move I recognize as one of frustration. I get that, I reply softly, but we can blend both. They can experience the joy of spontaneity and still have a routine. The tension crackles between us, an undeniable force that seems to be lifting us farther apart rather than bringing us together. But as the conversation flows, I start to catch glimpses of understanding breaking through his resolve. I just want what's best for them, he finally admits, his voice dropping to a softer tone, vulnerability creeping in. There's a flash of something in his eyes, a flicker of the man I once loved, now buried beneath layers of hurt and anger. I want to reach out and tell him that I want the same, that we're on the same team, even if the landscape of our relationship looks rocky. We don't solve all our problems in that moment, but we find a tentative agreement to communicate better and be more flexible with the kids' needs, interspersed with laughter as we reminisce about our adventures as parents, the things we learned along the way. It's not a perfect resolution, but there's a sense of clarity, a first step taken amidst the chaos. Days pass, and I notice not only the kids adapting but also the shift in our interactions, slowly morphing from tactical maneuvers in the chess game of co-parenting to more fluid collaboration, joint parenting strategies forming organically. There's still awkwardness, but each exchange feels like another layer peeling away. I find small delights in the way our conversations start to shift from contentious to constructive, almost playful. One afternoon, we're out for ice cream with the kids, and I catch Jake stealing glances at me, a smile breaking across his face as our daughter stumbles over a joke, her laughter ringing out like music. I can't help but wonder if maybe, just maybe, we're onto something here. As I watch him lean down to share a secret with our son, a shadow of our shared past floats above us, and I grasp tightly onto that flicker of hope. And yes, it's messy, and sometimes I still doubt if I'm making the right choices, but I also see that both Jake and I are evolving, laying a foundation I never expected to build again. This journey is still evolving, and in embracing the chaos, we might just find a bit of harmony after all. As we pile back into the car, the kids chattering away, I know it's not about erasing the past, but about forging ahead together, and for their sake, I'm willing to keep trying. The car hums softly as I turn the key in the ignition, a familiar routine that now feels like a sweet promise rather than a burden. The kids' voices blend into a joyful symphony behind me, filled with anecdotes about school, art projects, and their latest obsessions with superheroes. Ruby, my youngest, is still that vibrant bundle of energy, her laughter bouncing off the window as she enthusiastically reenacts some cartoon character. Max, ever the quieter one, joins in with his own, quieter enthusiasm, spinning elaborate tales about the cosmic adventures he imagines. As I glance at their faces in the rearview mirror, I can't help but feel the warmth radiating from their innocence. This moment, their laughter, the chaos, even the perpetual mess of snack crumbs and toys, is what I clung to during the hollow moments post-divorce. Jake and I may have our differences, but what remains steadfast is our shared priority, these kids. My heart beats a little harder, knowing we're creating a shared narrative, writing our story word by word even amidst the noise. But then, the undercurrent of anxiety twists in my stomach again as I consider the upcoming family meeting, our first sit-down since our awkward attempts at blending our parenting styles. I had even suggested bringing in a mediator, believing that a neutral third party could help us navigate the rocky waters of our new reality without drowning in resentment. Honestly, I felt like a ship tossed in stormy seas, unsure of whether I'd find safe harbor or capsize under the weight of our past. "Mom, look at this." Ruby suddenly squeals, waving a crumpled piece of paper mid-performance. It's her drawing, a colorful explosion on the page that vaguely reminds me of a rainbow, yet definitely carries all the chaos I might feel inside. "This is you and Daddy fighting the evil robots." I chuckle lightly, the image surreal yet kind, reminding me that somehow, even in our most contentious moments, those little faces still find a way to make sense of things. "And do we win?" I ask playfully, hoping to inspire a solution rather than digging deeper into the abyss of disagreements. "Of course. You always win, Mom." She beams with confidence, solidifying the sense of heroism I sometimes feel falling flat in those tense moments with Jake. It's a fleeting reassurance, but it's enough to allow me some clarity. Maybe winning isn't even the point. The thought lingers, heavy but enlightening, as we pull into our driveway, with its friendly chaos of toys left behind from a previous playdate. As we step inside, I can almost see the ghosts of arguments past lingering in the air, yet there's also the comforting aroma of our evening routine, the smell of something simmering on the stove, the scattered shoes and backpacks as evidence of busyness. This is our refuge, a home built on love, tension, and the messiness of family life. After dinner, I caught Jake on a rare day when he'd swung by to help me set up for the meeting. I noticed the way he hesitated, taking everything in, as if he were expecting me to lay a landmine somewhere between us. Instead, with all the courage I could muster, I suggested we work on a joint agenda to present to the mediator. This felt like an attempt to heal wounds, to find some middle ground, a step into a shared realm rather than one wrought with individual agendas. So, what's important to you? He asked after a long, thoughtful pause. My heart raced, not from the administrative task at hand but from the raw vulnerability of really addressing what we both sought to accomplish. I could easily slide into bitterness, hash out the past mistakes and newfound tensions. Instead, I chose to share my fear of the kids feeling caught in our storm. I want them to feel safe, I admitted, my voice a whisper dipped in emotion. We were in this together now, and I realized how fundamental it was to set aside old grudges to collaborate toward ensuring they didn't feel like pawns in our unraveling. It felt liberating with just the energy in the room shifting, even if it was only a crack in the ice we both had skated on for too long. With the meeting looming, a flicker of hope ignites again. I can almost breathe in the possibility of redemption. That night, as I stumbled into the quiet of my bedroom, the laughter of the kids fading into soft echoes, I knew the path ahead would remain jagged. Yet, in the chaos and uncertainty of co-parenting, I could finally see we were capable of more than I believed. And perhaps, just perhaps, we would carve our own way, one shared drawing, one awkward discussion, one messy dinner at a time. It was a Friday night when everything spiraled out of control. My roommates had left for the weekend, and I was finally looking forward to a little alone time with a guy I had been seeing for a few weeks, Jake. We'd been texting like teenagers and deciding to have him over felt both thrilling and slightly reckless. The rain was pouring outside, creating a cozy atmosphere, and all I could think about was how nice it would be to watch a movie and share some popcorn together. But as the night unfolded, I realized I was in for more than I bargained for. Just as we settled down on the couch, the mood lit by soft lighting and the faint sound of raindrops hitting the window, my phone buzzed. It was a message from my roommate, Melissa, who had gone home to her mom's place. At first, I shrugged it off, but when I glanced at the message, my heart sank. "Hey, can you keep it down? My mom is trying to sleep." I thought about responding to reassure her, but then Jake leaned closer, and I forgot about my phone altogether. The dialogue in front of us faded as tension filled the air, and it wasn't long before we were lost in each other. Just as the movie played on, laughter erupted from me, followed by Jake's playful remarks. That's when it happened. 3 loud, furious knocks pounded at my door, punctuated by the unmistakable voice of Melissa's mom, "Shut the fuck up." It was an implosion of shock. I froze, wild thoughts racing through my mind. Did she really just pound on my door? In my apartment? I glanced at Jake, who looked just as startled, and for a moment, we exchanged looks, an unspoken mix of embarrassment and disbelief. I didn't want to open the door, but I also felt weirdly obligated to address what had just happened. I took a deep breath, my cheeks heating up as I approached the door. I peeked through the peephole, half expecting it to be my imagination, but she was there, arms crossed and a scowl that could scare a bear. Can I help you?" I called out, keeping my voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions stirring inside me. This is my apartment, and I'd appreciate a little respect. But instead of backing off, she banged harder, "You shouldn't be so loud. Think of others." There was an immediate tension in the air, thick enough to cut. I was furious but also flustered and embarrassed. The last thing I wanted was to be in a standoff with my roommate's mom. "I'm sorry, we'll keep it down," I replied, the words feeling like defeat. Jake shifted awkwardly behind me, and I felt myself shrinking, like a child caught misbehaving. When her footsteps faded away, I turned back to Jake, my cheeks still burning. "I can't believe that just happened," I said, my voice barely a whisper, feeling both humiliated and annoyed. "Yeah, that was intense," Jake replied, trying to lighten the mood with a crooked smile. But I couldn't shake off my embarrassment. "Do you think I'm the asshole here?" I asked, half joking but deep down, feeling the weight of her words. "I mean, it's our space." But then again, I didn't think about how loud we were being. Jake shrugged, "I think she overreacted. Just because she doesn't want to hear you having fun doesn't mean you should have to hide. I nodded, feeling a little comforted, but I couldn't escape the swirl of mixed emotions. As the night continued, it was hard to focus on anything else. The initial excitement had fizzled into a mix of anxiety and self-doubt. What if Melissa felt the same way? What if I really was the problem? After he left, I collapsed onto my bed, the night replaying in my head like a broken record. Should I write to Melissa and apologize, or would that just confirm I was in the wrong? Was I really the one who'd crossed a line here? In the days that followed, I spent a considerable amount of time lost in a loop of whether or not I should approach Melissa about it again. Part of me felt defensive. It was my home, after all, but then again, I didn't want to create unnecessary tension between us. Eventually, I did reach out. "Hey, can we chat? I'm sorry if we were too loud the other night," I typed out. I watched the three little dots dance as she typed back, my anxiety bubbling. "It's fine. Mom just gets like that sometimes. Thanks for saying something." The relief washed over me, but this lingering question hung in the air: was I truly wrong to let loose in my own space? In the end, it didn't seem to matter as much. I learned that sometimes, even in your home, you have to navigate the constant balancing act of respect and personal freedom. And that's just life, finding that middle ground between living fiercely and being considerate. Even if it took a knock on the door from Melissa's mom to figure it out, it was a lesson learned. It was a couple of weeks later when the whole scenario faded into a distant memory, tucked neatly alongside other college mishaps. I was mostly back to my routine: classes, work, the occasional movie night with roommates. But every now and then, I'd catch myself glancing at the door, half expecting another unexpected visitor. It wasn't that my roommate's mom was a regular fixture in our lives, but that incident had a way of imprinting itself, a reminder that boundaries could be so easily crossed. One evening, I had finally decided to treat myself and unwind with a glass of cheap wine and that new show everyone was raving about. I remember feeling the warmth of the alcohol settle comfortably in my stomach as the credits rolled. The apartment was quieter than usual, the hum of the refrigerator a soft backdrop to my thoughts, and I couldn't resist the urge to kick back and binge watch. Just as I was sinking into the couch, a message pinged on my phone. It was Melissa, my roommate, asking if I could give her a ride to the grocery store. I noticed the clock. It was nearing 10 p.m. I hesitated for a moment, torn between my desire to relax undisturbed and wanting to be a good roommate. Opting for the latter, I texted back, "Sure. Just let me finish this episode." Melissa's response was quick, clearly eager. "Thanks. I'll be ready in 15. As I tossed my phone onto the couch, I found myself smirking at the irony of the situation. The last time I'd had a guy over, it hadn't gone great, but here I was, willingly putting on my altruistic hat and totally ignoring that nagging voice in my head. 15 minutes later, I was in the one car we had shared, parked in the grocery store lot surrounded by flickering fluorescent lights. Melissa climbed in, a flurry of movement with her purse and a list that she waved enthusiastically in front of my face. I made a plan this time. "We won't end up with 8 boxes of cereal," I chuckled, appreciating her diligent efforts to keep our fridge alive. As we drove, I couldn't help but notice how her mood had shifted over the last few weeks. Melissa seemed lighter, happier. Maybe it was just the thrill of independence or a deeper realization about her own boundaries. Either way, it was nice to see her so animated, and it started to tug at my heart a little, reminding me she was a good friend, despite her mom's overly assertive parenting style. The atmosphere in the car buzzed with easy conversations about mundane things: classes, parties, the ever-growing stack of laundry that awaited both us at home. But as we turned off the lively street into the quieter residential neighborhood, I felt a pang of anxiety mingle with the lightness. I didn't want to navigate any emotional heaviness tonight. Just as I was thinking about the general awfulness of adulting, Melissa's phone buzzed. I could see her mumble, "Oh, it's my mom," as she clicked on the message. "What does she want?" I asked, half joking. Melissa promptly rolled her eyes, but her expression shifted. "Oh. I think she's asking why I haven't returned home yet." I smirked, ready to tease her about being grown, but caught myself. She had been assertively carving out her own space lately, even splurging on new clothes and ditching old habits she no longer wanted. That confidence felt contagious, but instantly, I felt twinges of guilt for my own behavior. Did I have a moment to share the living fiercely lesson I'd learned? Or was I just biding my time until my own surface changed? As we entered the store, I tried to shake off the creeping sensation. Eventually, Melissa and I fell into our usual routine, scanning the aisles for snacks and sharing our dietary sins with each other. A rhythm, a comfort. Somewhere around the frozen foods, we heard a commotion. I glanced back towards the entrance, wrinkling my brow. A man standing outside the store was clearly trying to get someone's attention, waving his arms like a conductor. I didn't think much of it, but Melissa paused mid-sentence and stared, an expression of recognition washing over her face. "Oh no," she muttered. "It's my mom." I turned and sure enough, there was her mom, hands on her hips, staring at the man as if he might turn into a pumpkin at midnight. My heart sank a bit for Melissa. The last thing you want is your mother circling like a hawk on your coattails. Just as I was contemplating our escape route, her mom finally saw us. It was like those moments in bad sitcoms where the planet stops spinning, and every character locks eyes in slow motion. "Melissa, I was looking for you," she shouted, her voice ricocheting off the store walls. We exchanged glances, a silent agreement of solidarity. I could only imagine what was coming. As her mom marched toward us with purpose, I debated whether I should vanish into the cereal aisle or just face the impending storm. "Mom, it's fine. We're just shopping," Melissa chimed, but her mom wasn't having it. She wasted no time pointing an accusatory finger at the guy outside. "You can't let some stranger talk you into late-night runs, Melissa." It struck me like a bolt of lightning. Melissa shrank a little before her mom's fierce gaze. I could see the conflict dance in her eyes, loyalty to her upbringing versus the newfound freedom she was still testing out. What was I supposed to do? I stood there, feeling like a spectator to a complex play where the spoilers had all been handed out, but I was still in the audience. It felt all too familiar, this crossroad between childhood and adult independence. "I think you should apologize," her mom continued, her voice strained yet firm, but I observed a flicker of uncertainty in Melissa's eyes. The lessons learnt came rushing back to me, and I found myself taking a slow breath. I couldn't intervene directly, that would only throw fuel on the fire, but I wanted to help, to be part of her process of establishing that line she needed, just like I was doing for myself. Or maybe we're both allowed to navigate our own choices, Mom? I found myself saying, my heart racing. It felt awkward to speak up but somehow necessary. The tension in the air turned thick as her mom's expression shifted sharply in my direction, sudden recognition. "You too, huh? What a fun way to confuse the adults." She huffed, a mixture of frustration and disbelief intermingling in her expression. But there was something more, maybe an inkling of understanding that she wasn't the only one learning here. And just like that, I felt Melissa at my side, her posture straightening ever so slightly, emboldened to confront this moment. That nothingness between all of us had shifted, and as we stood there, I sensed the space for a dialogue, a chance to redefine it rather than simply acquiesce. All I could think was how beautifully human it was to navigate those turbulent waters together. As the conversation pivoted slowly but surely, it felt less like a scolding and more like a chance for both Melissa and her mom to meet halfway. The anxiety washed away, leaving behind a glimmer of hope for growth. Later that night, we returned home, our bags of supplies in tow. Melissa turned to me, beaming. "That was kind of you, by the way." I shrugged it off. But inside, I felt a swell of pride. I figured it had taken more than a knock at my door to find that balance, but wasn't that the real point? And as I settled on the couch again, wrapped in a familiar blanket, I recognized that sometimes life does require navigating a complex dance between assertiveness and empathy. Even if no one got the perfect score, we were all learning together, step by awkward step. As I settled into that well-worn couch, the remnants of our chaotic evening danced in my mind like strobe lights. My phone buzzed with a text from Melissa, "THX for being cool today. Want to finish that movie?" I glanced at the clock, midnight, but the couch was calling me. I tapped back, absolutely, feeling a warmth in my chest that relaxed the tension from earlier. I couldn't help but smile. The door incident had transformed from an awkward moment into something almost bonding. Melissa had a way of making even the most uncomfortable situations seem light. As she walked back into the room, tossing her hair over her shoulder and plopping down next to me, I felt grateful for her presence. We fired up the movie, but my mind kept wandering back to that knock on the door. What if I'd reacted differently? I could have stood my ground, thrown a snarky comment back at her mom. Yet, something in me knew that wouldn't have ended well. It's funny how an impulsive night can morph into a reflective conversation. Between whirs of the DVD player and the intimate glow of the TV, I pondered our little family of sorts, this quirky motley crew we had become. As the movie played, I peeked over at Melissa, who was completely absorbed in the film. I used to think of her as just a roommate, but through shared moments like these, she had become something deeper, a friend. I realized maybe we were all a bit like that, a collection of awkward encounters stitched together by our attempts to understand each other. Halfway through the film, her phone buzzed. She picked it up, her face dropping slightly. That flutter of concern pulled me out of the fictional world we'd trapped ourselves in. "It's my mom," she said, her voice tinged with apprehension. "I'd better take this." I nodded, feeling an unexpected wave of protectiveness wash over me. I didn't want any more drama tonight. I listened to her side of the conversation, the commendable sonorous tone she adopted to reassure her mom. A few minutes later, she returned, her smile forced. "Just a little concerned about me, you know how it is." "But I told her I'm fine," she added, her expression softening. We settled back into our movie, but I could tell it affected her. "Do you ever feel like you have to keep convincing people you're okay, even when you're perfectly fine?" I asked, trying to understand the weight of her burden. Melissa glanced at me, her eyes dancing with surprise. "All the time. It's exhausting, especially when you're just trying to enjoy life." We shared a silence, each lost in our thoughts, resonating in the unspoken understanding of what it meant to live under the expectations of others. After what felt like an eternity wrapped in our shared silences, she finally muttered, "Thanks for being chill today. It means a lot now." "Yeah, well, some days I stumble less than others," I replied with a hint of laughter, hoping to lighten the mood as the movie credits began to roll. The laughter felt comforting, a reminder of why I cherished these moments, even those tempered by uncomfortable knocks on the door. After the movie ended, we fell into our usual routine of chatting about the plot and debating character choices, but beneath that light-hearted conversation lingered a seriousness. I could sense the flickers of realization in the air, that we were learning how to coexist, showing consideration for each other's vulnerabilities while carving out our spaces. The night wore on, the world outside growing quiet, but inside our apartment, life pulsed with potential and vulnerability, reminding me that this space belonged to all of us. The lessons we absorbed weren't just individual, they were shared, and we were better for it. I mused on this balance we were gradually discovering, an intricate dance, and perhaps that constant, uneasy rhythm was what made life richer. As I nestled deeper into my blanket, the shadows of our earlier chaos turned to whispers of understanding. Sure, boundaries and respect were important, but what really mattered was the effort to bridge those gaps. Reflecting on our interactions, I couldn't help but feel optimistic about what tomorrow would bring, knowing that in our struggles to meet in the middle, we found something profoundly human: connection. I drifted off, the faint sounds of laughter lingering in my ears, hopeful for whatever adventures lay ahead. I never thought asking my friend to bring her own food would turn into such a big deal, but here we are. You see, I live in a small studio apartment that I love dearly, but my budget is tighter than my jeans after the holidays. My friend Emma and I have known each other for years. We met in college, bonded over shared lunches in the cafeteria, her expertly crafted avocado toast against my questionable attempts at repurposing leftover pizza. We had a rhythm, you know? We'd swap meals and recipes without a second thought, but fast forward to today, and the stakes feel different. When Emma texted me last week asking to come over, I felt a surge of excitement, followed by that familiar pang of anxiety about dinner. My cupboards had become depressingly bare. An empty fridge greeted me each time I opened it, which was a stark contrast to the last few years when I had a solid stock of ingredients. I quickly realized that it wouldn't be fair to expect her to feast on my sad assortment of condiments and a wilted cucumber. So, sheepishly, I sent her a text with a suggestion. "Hey. Love to have you over. Would you mind bringing something to munch on?" As soon as I hit send, a knot twisted in my stomach. Was I being rude? I shook my head, trying to dismiss the nagging thoughts that followed. I wasn't trying to be stingy, just practical. But as the evening approached, I could feel my anxiety building. When she arrived, her expression was a mix of surprise and a hint of disappointment, and I immediately felt small. "You really asked me to bring food?" She laughed, her eyes slightly narrowed. It cut deep. "I just thought," I stammered, trying to make sense of my own reasoning, "I haven't had the chance to go grocery shopping this week." Creating a facade that everything was fine, I eached out for her usual laid-back demeanor, hoping it would lighten the mood. Instead, my home felt suddenly electric with tension. We settled on my tiny couch with a bowl of popcorn she had graciously brought. The crunches were too loud, filling the silence that stretched between us. I wanted to explain, to really convey my struggles, both financially and emotionally, but every attempt felt stunted, a half-formed thought getting lost in the noise of our moment. As we forced laughter while reminiscing about old times, I could sense that our dynamic had shifted slightly, and I wasn't sure how to mend it. After she left, I spent the rest of the night thinking about how trivial my request had been. Was I really the jerk for trying to be responsible, or had I crossed some invisible line in our friendship? Days turned into a week, and I'll admit, I was too cowardly to reach out. I thought about everything in a loop, replaying moments that I wished I had handled differently. Eventually, curiosity got the better of me, and I started drafting a post on a Reddit thread. My heart raced as the words poured out, sharing every doubt I had, every moment of joy and sorrow we'd experienced together. I anxiously awaited responses. To my surprise, the comments flooded in with empathy and understanding. "You're not an asshole, you're just being cautious," one user wrote. Their kind sentences soothed my worries a little, reminding me that I wasn't alone in navigating these awkward dynamics. A few days later, to my shock, Emma surprised me with a visit. This time, she showed up with a homemade pizza, not just any pizza, but one with toppings we used to argue about in school. We laughed until we cried over memories and bad ingredients, finally feeling like ourselves again amidst the melted cheese and gooey toppings. As we shared the meal, it occurred to me that this little hiccup wasn't a final verdict on our friendship. If anything, it opened the door for deeper honesty, that sometimes we need to be real about our situations, no matter how uncomfortable it feels. We talked it out, and it felt refreshing. I found comfort in her reassurance that there were no hard feelings. As I watched her eat, my heart softened more than I thought possible. I knew I still had a way to go with being open and vulnerable, learning to ask for help without shame, and recognizing the beauty of shared meals, no matter who brought the food. As we sat there, the warmth of the late afternoon sun spilling through my kitchen window, I couldn't help but reflect on how this little spat had shifted the ground beneath our feet. The table, now laden with an odd assortment of takeout containers and half-eaten dinners, felt transformed from a battleground into a sanctuary of sorts. As Sarah absent-mindedly picked at her fries, a mix of ketchup and ranch smeared across her plate, I felt grateful for her ability to laugh at the situation. "You know," she said between bites, "I could have easily been more upset. But in the grand scheme of things, it's just food." Her smile was genuine, but I knew there was a depth to it that hinted at her own struggles. I watched her, realizing that my discomfort had resonated with something deeper inside her as well. Maybe we both carried a little baggage that we had been hesitant to unpack. The conversation meandered from deep reflections on our friendship to lighter topics, like the hilarious antics of our mutual friends and the latest Netflix series we had been binging. With every joke, every shared look of amusement, I felt a layer of tension peel away. It was strange how vulnerability had become the unexpected glue holding our evening together, and I couldn't shake the feeling that this was a pivotal moment. For once, instead of clenching my fists over my own insecurities, I was loosening the grip and allowing acceptance into the cracks. As Sarah spoke about her recent promotion at work, animatedly detailing her new responsibilities, I took a moment to absorb what lay beneath the surface. It was evident she had been pushing herself hard, like all of us do in our quest for success, attaching her worth to her achievements. I had never really seen her in that light. We often navigated through life like two ships passing in the night, seldom hovering around each other's storms. "Hey, Sarah," I ventured, needing to bring up the elephant in the room again, about our food conversation. She raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. "Yeah? What about it?" I hesitated, unsure if I really wanted to dip into the well of awkwardness again. But something compelled me forward. "I think it's important for both of us to feel comfortable sharing our situations with each other. I don't want you to feel like you can't come over because you're worried about food or finances. We're friends, right? We should share everything." She nodded slowly, and I could see her processing my words. "I appreciate that. Honestly, I've never thought about it like that before. I guess I assumed if I came over, I should contribute. But I would hate for either of us to feel burdened in our friendship, especially when we're just trying to be there for each other." And there it was, a booming truth echoing in my mind. In our world of social expectations, I had been clinging to the idea that self-sufficiency was the end goal, but maybe friendship was just a dance of give and take. I couldn't remember the last time we'd simply let down our guards and leaned into the beautiful chaos of sharing moments together without the need for pretense. After dinner, we decided to make the most of the evening. We wandered over to my balcony, the sunset painting the sky in a wash of oranges and pinks. We talked long into the night, our laughter mingling with the distant sounds of the city. For the first time, I felt the freedom of being wholly myself with her, unencumbered by the fear of judgment. I realized that by addressing our discomfort, we had forged a deeper connection than mere shared meals. We had unveiled the threads of honesty and support that we could weave into the fabric of our friendship. As she packed up the remaining food, I felt a lightness settling in my chest. We agreed to alternate cooking duties moving forward, a new tradition starting that night. I knew there would be challenges ahead. There would be more meals shared and, inevitably, more awkward conversations. But for the first time, it didn't feel like a daunting task. It felt like an invitation to grow. Life is messy, friendships are complex, and sometimes the most beautiful moments emerge from the chaos. And surprisingly, I found myself looking forward to what lay ahead, a journey built on authenticity, laughter, and perhaps, a shared plate of cold fries. As I watched her meticulously dissect the lasagna I had prepared, grateful but honest about its slightly undercooked noodles, I realized how essential these moments of vulnerability were. Our conversations meandered from the food we were sharing to the deeper questions nestled in our lives, dreams, fears, and hopes for the future. I learned that she had been feeling overwhelmed at work, juggling deadlines like a circus performer. With flaming torches. "Sometimes I just want to quit," she admitted between bites, her voice small as if admitting defeat. I could see the stress etched on her face, the corners of her mouth twitching downwards, and it stirred something deep inside me. We exchanged reassurances, her struggles reminded me of my own, and perhaps that was why I felt compelled to invite her in the first place. The sound of forks clinking against plates filled the quiet space between us, creating a rhythm that felt comforting, like the pulse of a warm heartbeat. I offered her a second slice, and she graciously accepted, saying something about needing all the sustenance she could get. As she dug in with genuine appreciation, I felt a sense of connection bloom, vibrant and alive between us. It was a revelation, right there, amidst the backdrop of my cozy, albeit cluttered kitchen. I discovered that sharing wasn't solely about the food. It was about the act of carving out time for each other, to savor not just the flavors but the stories that came with them. When the dishes were finally cleared away, we sat together on my couch, her laughter dancing like sunlight in the room, chasing away the shadows that had lingered too long in both our hearts. There was something ineffable about that evening. It felt like we had pierced through a veil of pretense, revealing the raw fabric of our friendship. I assured her we'd tackle the cooking duties equally, promising to bring my best every time, except for the cold fries incident. We both chuckled at that one. In the days that followed, there were more meal preparations, more invitations extended, and they were filled with the same laughter and vulnerability. We had created this little sanctuary of openness where the awkwardness of our past discussions had transformed into playful banter, a dance of sharing rather than a struggle. My heart felt buoyant as I navigated through these moments, slowly shedding the layers that had covered me like an unwieldy blanket. I began to realize that friendships are indeed a living, breathing thing. They require nourishment, like the meals we prepared together. As we took turns hosting, sometimes we cooked, other times we ordered in, and occasionally we compromised with a bowl of cereal and mismatched utensils. Each gathering cemented our bond further. Gradually, I learned to voice my feelings without fear, sharing my insecurities, my worries, and yes, even my cravings. There was something beautifully symbiotic about this arrangement, creating space for both of us to express our needs honestly. One evening, as we sat surrounded by half-empty pizza boxes and laughter spilling into the corners of my living room, I caught a glimpse of the journey we had traveled. The small discomfort of that first conversation felt like a stepping stone leading us into territory rich with understanding and connection. I realize now that our friendship isn't just about bringing food, it's about bringing ourselves into the open, flaws and all. As warm memories threaded together with laughter and late-night heart-to-hearts, I couldn't help but feel grateful for the bumps along the road. They had carved out this rhythm of authenticity in my life, reminding me that vulnerability isn't something to be feared, it's a bridge connecting us to one another in this beautifully messy thing we call life. And as I glanced over at her, her laughter mingling with the soft glow of the evening light, I felt a peace settle in. We had turned a once uncomfortable moment into a source of joy, building a deeper friendship around the table of shared experiences. This was not the end, but just the beginning of many meals to come. I sat on our faded couch, the kind that had seen better days, staring blankly at the coffee table littered with wedding invitations. My husband, Kyle, had just received one from his sister, and the moment he read the name of the venue, the same place where we'd had our own wedding, the nostalgia washed over me like a tidal wave. But it quickly faded, replaced by an unsettling rush of anxiety. You see, Kyle hadn't spoken to his sister in 2 years. It wasn't one of those petty squabbles that could be brushed aside. It was a feud that began when she belittled our decision to have a child early in our marriage, telling us we were ruining our lives. The words had cut deep, especially because I had struggled with infertility and felt vulnerable in ways I couldn't vocalize. Now, here we were, standing on the precipice of a decision that made my stomach churn. As I watched him thumb through the invitation, I felt this surge of protectiveness rising within me. I knew that if he went, there was a good chance it would escalate into something ugly, and I didn't want to see him hurt again. I hesitated, then finally voiced my concern, choosing my words carefully. "Are you really planning on going?" I asked, trying to gauge his intentions. His expression shifted from excitement to uncertainty, and for a split second, I saw the flicker of ambivalence play across his face, a battle between the desire to reconcile and the fear of rejection that had haunted him for years. I took a breath and laid out my feelings, layering them with severity. He needed to understand that inviting old wounds to a celebration might not be as festive as it seemed. His eyes narrowed, a shadow of disappointment shadowed his features. "So, you want me to just stay home? Don't you want me to try?" The tension thickened in the air, I felt it tightening around us like a noose. I took a moment, biting my lip, knowing I had to be careful. "It's not just about you, Kyle. It's about protecting what we've built together. You can't just walk back into her life as if nothing happened, and I don't want to be there when it all falls apart." The room filled with a heavy silence, punctuated only by the ticking of the clock on the wall. I could read his frustration in the way his fingers tapped nervously against the armrest, and it killed me. I never wanted to feel like the villain in this story. I worried that by suggesting he shouldn't go, I was shoving him into a corner, making him choose between family and our life together. It was a painful realization, but the possibility of joy turning into chaos loomed larger than any hope of reconciliation. After a long pause, Kyle finally stood up, the invitation still clutched in his hand, and I watched him walk over to the window, staring out at the street below as if trying to find answers in the mundane world outside. I felt a pang of guilt. Was I really the one keeping him from healing? Or was I merely preserving the peace we had fought so hard to achieve? The truth is, there was no clear answer. In the end, he decided not to go, a choice I silently hoped had been for the best, even if it meant reducing his relationship with his sister to a flickering flame instead of a raging fire. This decision hung over us for weeks, and while it seemed right at the time, it brought a fresh wave of uncertainty. Had I done the right thing? I wished for the distance between him and his sister to dissolve, if only they could talk openly, if only she could see him for who he was now. A few days later, we received a phone call from her. Kyle answered with a mix of hope and trepidation, and I could hear her voice on the other end, barely above a whisper. I held my breath, wishing I could take the weight of this moment away from him. It turned into a long conversation, one I eavesdropped on while pretending to be busy in the kitchen. He was answering her questions cautiously, articulating the hurt without putting blame. When he finally hung up, his eyes were a mixture of relief and residual hurt. "We're going to try again," he said, and I smiled, not because the resolution was solid but because there was a glimmer of hope we hadn't foreseen. With every turn, every moment spent grappling with complex emotions, I realized love isn't just about the easy choices but also about the difficult conversations. A few weeks later, he joined me at the table while I was sorting the wedding invites again. "I think we should go to the wedding," he said softly, and panic flared in my chest. I didn't respond right away. Was I really okay with this? The truth is, I had no idea what the right answer was, but I knew it was a path we'd have to navigate together, no matter how thorny it might be. For what felt like an eternity, I stared at the wedding invites scattered across the table like a map to uncharted territory. Each envelope seemed to pulse with unvoiced questions and unacknowledged tensions, echoing the scramble of my thoughts. "Go to the wedding?" I murmured, trying to keep my voice steady despite the whirl of emotions churning inside me. In my mind, I could hear the punctuated laughter of my sister-in-law, Jessica, as I remembered last Thanksgiving, when the family had gathered together, and the warmth of those moments contrasted sharply with the chill that seemed to hang over everything since her engagement. She had never liked me, and I certainly hadn't warmed up to her. My husband, Daniel, had always been the centerpiece of that family, towering tall and sunny, expertly navigating the waves of familial drama with grace. And now, here we were. "You know they'll probably all side with her," I said, the weight of my concern sinking into the space between us. "They'll think I'm just being difficult, as usual. What if we don't go and it pushes you further away from them?" He sighed, running a hand through his hair, a gesture I had come to identify with his frustration. "Maybe it's time to confront all that. You're not difficult for wanting to protect your peace." "Protect my peace? I'm not some damsel in distress." The echoes of fighting for my own self-worth danced in my mind, and I hesitated, staring down at the invites again. This wasn't just about a single day, it was about the larger conversation of who we were becoming, together and apart. I felt the moment catch in my throat, the vulnerability hammering at my walls. What happens when you love someone but also know their family, and their history, could drown you in a sea of tides you couldn't escape? I just want us to be okay, I finally whispered, my heart heavy with doubt. Daniel's expression softened, and in those quiet seconds, I could see the boy who first kissed me under the stars, that same ember of hope flickering in his eyes. We will be. Whatever happens, we'll face it together. The words wrapped around me, a fragile lifeline, and for an instant, I believed in them. But then, silence slipped in, thick and unyielding, filling the cracks of our conversation. The day of the wedding dawned with a mix of excitement and dread. Clouds hung low in the sky, mirroring my uncertainty. As we dressed, I caught myself catching fleeting glimpses of Daniel, adorned in a suit that brought out the shine in his eyes. It was familiar yet filled with an edge of anxiety. I wondered, was he wearing it for them or for us? When we finally arrived at the venue, the air grew heavy with the scent of blooming flowers and inevitable conflict. Jessica was radiant, a knockout in ivory, and even through my resentment, I could feel the magnetic energy she exuded. As I stepped inside, the room seemed to spin. I could see the waves of family swirling around Daniel, pulling him into the currents of chatter. Each hug felt like a mugging, the warmth that enveloped him stealing pieces of the man I loved. "You made it," one of her relatives exclaimed, and I could tell the words were coated with a hint of surprise. The judgment was palpable, I could feel it prickling against my skin. I held my breath, fighting the urge to turn and flee. I lingered at the edges, watching Daniel greet family members with his disarming charm, but I felt like a ghost haunting the edges of his life. It was only a tentative hey from Jessica when she caught sight of me that anchored me back into reality. "Glad you came," she said, her smile tight and rehearsed, a contrast to the joyous atmosphere surrounding her. I nodded, feeling every moment stinging. Just when I was about to retreat to the bar, Daniel's laughter cut through the noise, a warm ember in the chilly distance. I stepped forward instinctively, drowning my insecurities in that familiar sound. The evening unfolded like a slow, painful dance. Each conversation felt like a tightrope walk, balanced between civility and rising tension. I could see Daniel start to look wearier as the hours ticked by, and I wondered if he, too, felt the weight of unspoken words hanging heavy in the air. Eventually, he found me by the appetizer table, his eyes searching mine for solace. "Let's step outside," he suggested, and his voice was firm, like a lifebuoy in a storm. We walked into the cool evening, the world outside humming softly, and I felt my shoulders drop just a bit. "I don't want to keep feeling like this," he confessed, hands tucked into his pockets, staring at the ground. "Being here, it's exhausting." My heart quickened. "So, what do we do about that?" I asked, feeling both terrified and relieved at the possibility of us figuring this out together. Our eyes locked, and for a moment, the chaos of the wedding faded into the background. "I guess we just need to make sure we don't lose what we've built," he said, his tone rich with resolve. The wedding buzzed behind us, merging into a muffled noise as I grasped the gravity of his words. We were two ships navigating our way through a stormy sea of familial expectations, and I couldn't help but feel hope blooming between us like wildflowers through a crack in the pavement. As the night unfolded, we exchanged glances and quiet smiles, little reminders that we had each other's backs. I still wasn't sure what the future held for us or how our relationship with Jessica would settle, but I knew that we'd face it side by side. I felt that old familiar warmth during the highs and gathered strength through the lows, knowing I could lean on him. Whatever we faced next, it was no longer just about a wedding, it was about us, and we were determined to weather the storm together. The weeks leading up to the wedding felt like a slow unraveling of both my anxiety and a tightening embrace of hope. Andy and I spent countless evenings discussing how to approach Jessica and her family, who traditionally wreathed their gatherings in an air of perfection. I often found myself lost in thought, worrying about every possible scenario. Would they even accept our presence after everything? Would he apologize and then be surprised by my hesitance? Nearly every night, I'd stare at the stars outside our window, trying to find answers in their distant flickers. Despite all the chaos, we managed to carve out moments of sheer joy amid the uncertainty. One Saturday, we decided to go on an impromptu hike, a little trail leading to a view we'd stumbled upon during one of our earlier adventures. There, on that sun-drenched mountaintop, it felt like our worries didn't matter quite as much. We laughed as we recounted the time we got lost for hours during a camping trip. He grinned, the way he always did when he was being playful, and nudged me, reminding me he would always choose me over getting lost, even if it meant wandering off the path sometimes. Together, right? He asked, a spark of purpose filling his gaze. Always, I assured him, even as my heart fluttered with the weight of the journey ahead. When the wedding weekend finally arrived, anxiety slithered back into my mind, weaving itself around my thoughts like a vine. I spent the morning getting ready, choosing a dress that felt right, not too elaborate, just enough to reflect my genuine self. In the mirror, I didn't quite recognize the woman looking back at me. She seemed so resolute yet fragile, a juxtaposition that mirrored the entire situation at hand. I felt the gravel of apprehension in my throat as we made our way to the venue, Andy's hand warm in mine, grounding me amidst my swirling thoughts. As we stepped into the extravagant hall filled with laughter and happiness, I could feel the tension coiling tight within me. Andy and I exchanged small talk about the decorations, the floral arrangements bursting with color that made everything feel vibrant, yet every cheerful sound felt like it was humming with an undercurrent of dread. We shared a few awkward smiles with family members who seemed blissfully unaware of the backstory. And there was Jessica, radiant and graceful, a fairy tale figure enveloped in a gown. My heart softened for a split second, until reality nudged me back awake. It was still a wedding marred by complexities. Before long, Jessica caught sight of us. Her expression shifted, and for just a heartbeat, I saw the flicker of worry dance across her features. But she turned her head away quickly, adjusting her attention to a friend beside her. My heart sank for both of us. She had a lot on her mind, and I knew our past might become an unwanted guest at this celebration. I glanced at Andy, who was watching me closely, and I decided to breathe through the moment. "We'll be okay, right?" I whispered, even though I was unsure myself. He nodded, determination lighting up his eyes, as if to say that we were in this together despite the storm brewing around us. As the night unfolded, we shared glances, laughter, and moments that made me realize how deeply we were connected. Our table found itself surrounded by family that was surprisingly warm and welcoming. A cousin of ours asked about how we'd been, easing me back into comfortable conversation. I felt a smile tugging at my lips as I recalled our recent adventures, the way Andy rolled his eyes good-naturedly when I dragged him to yet another gallery exhibit. Yet somewhere in the back of my mind, Jessica lingered like the ghost of unspoken words. Then it happened. Midway through dinner, Andy excused himself to head to the restroom. I hadn't meant to, but my eyes sought out Jessica across the room, and to my surprise, she was looking at me. Caught in that moment, I felt something shift, something different from before. No anger, just a curiously soft vulnerability. Perhaps we could bridge this gap. With hesitant steps, I made my way through the crowd, threading between joyful laughter and sweet reminiscences. "Jessica," I said softly when I finally stood in front of her, "can we talk?" Her smile faltered for an instant, but she nodded, the two of us moving away from the merriment. I could sense the weight of this moment, how years of tension coiled around us, waiting for an opening. "I didn't expect you guys to come," she said, the warmth in her tone stripped back, revealing an edge of something I couldn't quite identify. Did she feel trapped by our past? "Yeah, well, neither did we," I admitted, a nervous laugh slipping out. "But here we are. Together." The honesty in my voice felt like a lifeline thrown across treacherous waters. It's not that I don't care about you both. It's complicated," she murmured, her eyes locking onto mine, vulnerability spilling out in waves. We stood there for a moment surrounded by distant laughter, two estranged sisters-in-law searching for a thread of connection amidst a tapestry of family history. In those seconds, I realized that this was the start, not just for her, but for us. It wasn't about solving everything in a single conversation. It was about acknowledging our shared past, our painful scars, and learning to move forward, slowly but surely. No matter how clumsy it felt, we could try. "Complicated is okay," I said, almost surprised by my own words. "What's important is what we choose to do next." For a moment, it was just silence between us, more welcoming than an embrace. And as she nodded, I felt a cautious yet promising warmth begin to bloom in that space, like the first signs of spring pushing their way through a winter-frosted earth. Whatever happened next would be fraught with challenges, but Andy and I had already navigated this intricate path. All we needed was faith in the footsteps ahead of us. And in that warm ambience enveloped by festivity, I believed we might just find our way towards healing together. I never thought I'd be caught in the middle of a family drama, but here I am, standing in the kitchen, staring blankly at the pasta that didn't really seem to care about my life decisions. My dad had been married to Linda for about 3 years now, and while I'd tried my best to welcome her, I always felt a twinge of discomfort every time she tried to step into the role of mother in my life. It wasn't that she was a bad person. In fact, she was often kind and even funny at times, but she could never replace the void my mom left when she passed away when I was just a little kid. That morning, Linda had taken a moment to sit me down and remind me how important it was for us to bond as a family. "We need to create our own traditions, sweetie," she said, her voice warm and hopeful. I nodded, mostly just processing the fact that I had burned my thumbs while cooking. But inside, I felt like I was being backed into a corner. When she started telling me stories of her upbringing, sharing her formative moments, it felt invasive, like she was rewriting the narrative of my life without asking for my input. It came to a head later that evening when, after dinner, she asked me if I would call her mom at least once, just to make her feel special. My heart was racing, and without thinking, I blurted out, "I'm sorry, but you're not my mom." The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the clatter of my fork dropping onto my plate. I watched Linda's face fall, her smile replaced by a look of shock that felt like a physical blow. I could hear my dad in the other room, and suddenly, the air felt thick with unspoken words. Did I go too far? I thought, staring at Linda, who blinked back tears. It was all so confusing. I wanted to comfort her, but I also felt resentful. Did it even matter how she felt? My mom had been my whole world, and trying to fit Linda into that space felt wrong. I couldn't help but reflect on the harshness of my words, but part of me felt justified. After a long, awkward moment, my dad finally stepped in, trying to soothe the tension. "Let's take a break," he suggested, awkwardly glancing between us while Linda excused herself to the bathroom, clearly on the edge of sobbing. In that moment, I felt like the villain of a story I didn't even want to be a part of, as anguish and guilt wrapped around my heart like a heavy blanket. Leaving the kitchen, I felt lost, unsure of what to do. Was I an asshole for being honest, or was I simply trying to protect my own heart? A week passed, and the atmosphere in our house grew thick with unspoken sentiments. Linda was quieter at dinner, and my dad tried to bridge the gap, mentioning counseling, family dinners, and even board games. I wanted to scream that nothing could replace the bond I had with my real mom, but instead, I shoved my feelings deep down, hoping they would just dissolve. One evening, as I lay in bed, I replayed Linda's face, and it haunted me. I realized I did owe her some understanding. She was trying and maybe deserved more than I was willing to give. I gathered my thoughts, and the next day, I approached her, my stomach churning. "Can we talk?" I asked, my voice shaky. I watched her expression shift from guarded to curious. Sitting down together, I took a breath. "I think I overreacted the other day. I really appreciate what you're trying to do, but I kind of felt blindsided. I miss my mom." There was a long pause, and then she nodded, tears pooling in her eyes. "I miss my mom too," she whispered, and I finally saw her vulnerability shine through the walls she put up. It was the start of something, an understanding that maybe we could find common ground, even if it didn't lead to anything resembling a replacement. Days turned to weeks, and with each shared meal and tentative conversation, I felt cracks in the walls between us. It wasn't easy, but learning to navigate the relationship felt less like a betrayal to my mom's memory and more like a testament to forging my path forward. There wasn't a moment that settled everything perfectly, but we were trying, and that felt like a small victory. So, am I the asshole for telling Linda that she's not my mom? I suppose I didn't mean to be hurtful, but sometimes in the messiness of family bonds, honesty is its own form of love, and over time, I hope we can build something new from it. I think about that moment every day, how it felt to say the words out loud. "You're not my mom, Linda." They hung in the air like a heavy fog, lingering, piercing through the carefully constructed walls of our family dynamic. The first few months of her marriage to my dad had been a whirlwind of clashing emotions and awkward tries at affection. I remember my dad's hopeful smile when he introduced her to me. Part of me wanted to return that smile, wanted to embrace some version of a life where everything felt united once more. But another part, the louder, more stubborn part, stayed rooted in the past, clinging fiercely to memories of my mother. She was the soft voice that soothed my scrapes, the gentle hand that braided my hair before school. Linda seemed, well, different. It wasn't just her name or the clothes she wore, but the very essence of her spirit that stung with discomfort. I hated how right my father was about her. They seemed to fit together like a puzzle piece that didn't belong in the box where my mother once ruled. That day when I stood in the kitchen, silence draping over us like a shroud. I wanted to scream. Instead, I felt an overwhelming need to be brutally honest. I wish I had chosen my words with more care. Maybe if I had couched my feelings in softer tones, we could have sidestepped the devastation that washed across her face. She didn't say anything at first. After what felt like an eternity, she took a deep breath, almost like she was trying to hold back a wave threatening to crash. "I didn't expect to be," she finally replied, her voice breaking slightly, and I immediately felt the heat of regret coat my cheeks. Even at that moment, I could see how deeply this hurt her, wounds colliding in a chaotic dance of raw honesty and heartache. I wanted to reach out. I wanted to hug her and confirm that my heart was in a whirlpool, too. Yet, I felt trapped between my loyalty to my mother's memory and the reality that Linda was trying her best to step into a role she never asked for. How could I reconcile those feelings? The days that followed were heavy, dinner felt tense, silence punctuated our conversations, and I often caught my dad looking back and forth between us like a tennis match. Linda would make an effort, cooking meals with recipes she picked up from my mom's old cookbooks, but I could see that my smile wasn't what she was hoping for. I felt like a walking contradiction. I loved my dad and wanted him to be happy. I wanted to thrive in this new reality, yet I resisted every attempt Linda made, seeing each one as an encroachment on our shared past. After the rough patches, I began to think of all the small moments, the way she laughed easily at Dad's dad jokes, the way she gently teased him about his terrible dance moves. It made me search for the good, the genuine attempt to bond. The only way I could make sense of the situation was by journaling, pouring out my confusion and anger onto the pages nightly, letting my thoughts run wild before they bundled into knots of resentment in my chest. It was therapeutic, though sometimes heavy. I penned my memories with my mom, sketched out the ways I still missed her. I also started to write about the moments with Linda that didn't feel so bad, almost like building a scrapbook of feelings I could revisit any time I wavered. The day finally came when I saw Linda sitting alone on the back porch, a cup of tea untouched against the cooling wood. Every part of me hesitated to join her, unsure of how to breach what felt like a chasm that had formed between us. But that little voice inside nudged me, encouraging me to be brave. Taking a deep breath, I stepped outside. "Hey, is this seat taken?" I asked, the words barely more than a whisper. She looked up, surprise etched on her face. "No, it's all yours." We sat in silence for a moment, both of us tracing the outline of our thoughts in the air between us. Finally, I spoke. "I'm sorry about what I said the other day. I didn't mean to hurt you." She turned to me, her eyes shimmering in the soft light, and for the first time, I noticed the vulnerability behind her usual confidence. "I know you didn't. I think we're both trying to figure this out." And there it was, an acknowledgement of the shared struggle, the complexities of our new reality. In that moment, it felt less like a betrayal to my mother's memory and something that might grow. Something new. It began to dawn on me that it was okay to have space in my heart for both Linda and my memories of my mom. Tension still hung in our home like an ever-present guest, but we were learning, piece by piece, how to alter our rhythms into something that did not erase but enhanced. I could let my past stand beside my present. Maybe I'd never call Linda Mom, but I could give her a chance to be something else, a figure carved from shared struggles and burgeoning affection. Every step forward felt tentative, but it was direction. Because sometimes, in the messiness of family bonds, honesty transforms into understanding, and hope quietly takes root. It may not be simple, but amidst the chaos, a soft light flickered, reminding me that the journey is what shapes us. And while I don't have all the answers yet, I know we're figuring it out together, and that has to count for something. But the path towards that flickering light wasn't straight, far from it, actually. Just last week, I found myself seated at the kitchen table, the two of us sharing a dinner that felt far too formal, like we were actors in a play neither of us signed up for. Linda had cooked a lasagna, my mom's recipe, the way she used to make it, with layers of cheese that melted together harmoniously. It tasted almost right, but every bite sent me spiraling back to memories of a time when family dinners felt whole. Chewing was just a cover for my thoughts, and when Linda leaned forward, her plate halfway to her lips, I braced for impact. "You used to love your mom's lasagna," she said, the corners of her mouth betraying a hopeful smile. It wasn't the first time she'd tried to nudge open that door, and my stomach twisted. I blinked hard, feeling this chasm that was all at once shrinking but still wouldn't budge. "Yeah, I did," I replied, trying to keep my tone even. "Maybe we can," she started, but I cut her off. It doesn't feel the same now," I admitted, the words slipping out like shards. Regret washed over me immediately, but Linda hardly flinched. Instead, her eyes softened, and for a moment, I recognized that flicker of understanding. "I know it doesn't, and I'm not trying to replace her," she said quietly, her voice almost breaking. "I miss her, too." It struck me then how odd and beautiful grief can be, a shared experience even between people who should feel worlds apart. My heart tightened, the anger ebbing away, and I realized that we were in the same storm, even if we had different boats. As we navigated those choppy waters, I was surprised to find my guard lowering just a fraction. The tension didn't dissolve, but it transformed, taking on a shape that felt less like hostility and more like something unforeseen. We exchanged stories, her memories of my mom as a stubborn friend, mine as the guiding light in my life. It somehow built bridges over that chasm, filling in the gaps with laughter and remembrance that felt less like an intrusion and more like a tribute. A week later, she asked if I wanted to go to the local farmer's market with her. I hesitated, panic gripped my insides. Was I actually considering spending more time with her? But there was a twinkle in her eye that day, reflecting genuine excitement, and for the first time, I thought maybe it wouldn't hurt to try. "Sure," I replied, the word feeling like it was floating between us, fragile yet full of promise. That morning, we walked side by side under the bright sun, the air rich with the scent of fresh produce, and I remember stopping at a stall overflowing with vibrant flowers. Linda picked out a bundle of sunflowers, her fingers brushing against mine as she handed them to me. "They reminded me of you," she said simply, as if it was normal. "Bright and standing tall." Those words lingered long after that day, threading through the tapestry of our evolving relationship. It wasn't a miracle, but it was a start. I still grappled with feelings of guilt and nostalgia, moments when I'd catch myself longing for that call I could no longer make, a habit of retreating into the secure arms of memory. But every shared moment with Linda peeled away a layer of that discomfort, revealing something underneath, a tentative friendship. As I sit here now, reflecting on all of this, I realize I still don't call her mom. It doesn't feel right, it's too soon, maybe too far-fetched. But there's a warmth that blooms between us, something that still requires nurturing. I've come to appreciate Linda's attempts, and maybe she's come to understand the delicate dance of love and loss that I walk each day. There's room for this new identity we've crafted together, a designation that doesn't aim to erase my past but lifts it up with a new light. So here we are, standing on the edge of something uncharted yet familiar, where understanding begins to bloom in the cracks of our shared experience. And while it's still messy, I'm learning to accept the imperfections and embrace this journey together, one sunflower at a time. I never thought a simple name could create such a rift in my relationship, but here I am, standing at the crossroads of family dynamics and the yearning for self-identity. My name is Mia, a perfectly ordinary name that I've carried my whole life, yet somehow, my boyfriend's mom insists on calling me Princess. I know, right? It sounds adorable, maybe even endearing at first, but let me tell you, it rubbed me the wrong way. I mean, I'm all for playful nicknames, but there's something about being labeled as a princess that felt patronizing, especially coming from a woman I was supposed to impress. The first time I met Beth, Scott's mom, I walked into their cozy living room, filled with laughter and the smell of her famous lasagna. Scott introduced me, and she looked me up and down, beaming, and said, "Welcome, Princess. You must be the one who stole my son's heart." I laughed, played along, hoping this was just a passing fluke of warmth. But it stuck. Over dinner, she didn't falter, addressing me as Princess every chance she got, even as I self-deprecatingly corrected her, "Just Mia is fine." But the more I said it, the more she smiled as though I were merely being modest. It became this strange game, this insistence on seeing me through a lens that didn't feel like me at all. Fast forward to a couple of months later, and I finally reached my boiling point. It was a chilly Friday night, and I was about to join Scott and his mom for some takeout. As soon as I walked in, Beth turned her head, and with that wide grin, she exclaimed, "Hello, Princess. Ready for a royal feast?" I felt my stomach clench. My heart raced. It's not like I wanted to confront her, but something in me snapped. "Can you please just call me Mia?" The kitchen fell silent. Scott's fork paused mid-air, and his eyes were wide, as if I'd set off fireworks in the middle of a library. Beth's expression shifted from surprise to confusion, and then, slowly, to hurt. "Oh dear, I thought you liked it. I thought it was cute." She trailed off. My heart sank. I didn't want to hurt her feelings. But I felt so invisible, like I was wrapped in this blanket of a persona that wasn't mine. I took a deep breath, bracing myself. I appreciate that you mean well, but it's just not me. I'm not a princess, I'm just Mia. And I want to be seen as me. I could feel the tension crackling in the air, a suffocating silence overshadowing the warm aroma of the lasagna. Scott shifted uncomfortably, and I could tell he was caught in the middle. He sighed, "Mom, I think Mia is just trying to make her own space in our lives." The moment hung heavy between us until finally, after what felt like an eternity, Beth let out a gentle sigh. "I'm sorry, dear. I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable. I'll call you Mia from now on." Relief washed over me, but then guilt sank in. Was I too harsh? Had I robbed her of her fun? Later that night, as Scott and I lay in bed, I whispered, "Do you think I overreacted?" He turned to me, brushing my hair back gently. "No, you needed to speak up. It's part of who you are. I love you for being authentic." I closed my eyes, accepting that love sometimes requires discomfort. I still felt a bit unsettled about how things would change between Beth and me, but I hoped this was the starting point for a more honest relationship. A week later, as we gathered for a family game night, I nervously walked in, stealing a glance at Beth. I braced myself for another princess, but instead, she looked up, smiled gently, and said, "Hey, Mia. Ready to kick some butt at Uno?" I smiled, feeling a surge of warmth. Maybe this was the bridge we needed in a relationship that could thrive on authenticity. In the end, I realized that asking to be called by my own name wasn't about being a diva, it was about claiming my identity. As I slipped into the familiar rhythm of laughter and light-hearted banter, I understood that sometimes, standing firm is what allows us to grow closer. In that moment, surrounded by the colorful cards and the comfortable smell of popcorn floating through the air, I felt a surprising sense of relief wash over me. Sure, there was an awkwardness that still lingered from my last confrontation with Beth, the way her face had hardened, if only for a moment, when I first brought up the whole Princess Mia situation, but now that felt like a small bump in the road compared to the joy of playing with my boyfriend, Jake, and his mom. As we began our game, I could feel the tension ease, replaced by the playful competition that made family game nights both charming and exasperating in equal measure. With each round, I caught myself stealing glances at Beth, who was animatedly counting her cards, her laughter ringing out with each draw that wasn't what she'd hoped for. I marveled at how her jovial nature seemed to melt any lingering awkwardness I had been carrying. "How about a little wager?" I suggested, half joking, as I threw down a wild card and let the red skip across the table. "Loser does the dishes." Beth raised an eyebrow, the competitive spark igniting in her eyes. "You're on, girl." The energy fizzed between us as we rallied to see who'd end the night victorious, whether it was my careful strategy or Beth's exuberance that took the win. I forgot momentarily about the years and expectations that often hung uncomfortably between us. Yet, still, the question of my identity lingered in the back of my mind. I thought back to that uneasy conversation in the kitchen just a week ago, where I had hesitated, yet ultimately decided to stand up for myself. I'd never wanted to be confrontational, but being called princess felt like I was being funneled into a box that didn't fit. As much as I appreciated all the love Beth had poured into making Jake into the wonderful person he was, I was my own person, and that deserved to be recognized. As the night wore on, something seemed to shift in Beth's demeanor too. She started to share more stories about Jake's childhood, how he'd once spent a summer building a treehouse in their backyard and how he had stubbornly insisted on decorating it with stars and a neon green paint that he'd picked himself. Hearing these anecdotes not only brought me closer to Jake, they lured me into Beth's world, deepening our connection. After a few rounds, Beth laid her cards down with a flourish and looked straight at me, determination etched across her face. "All right, Mia," she began, the tender lilt of her voice interrupting my thoughts, "I think we need to have a real talk." My heart sank a little. Had I overstepped after all? Was it too soon? "Let's do it," I replied, summoning my courage. She smiled again, but this time there was a vulnerability beneath the surface. "I know I can be a bit old-fashioned, and princess was just how I thought I was connecting with you. I truly care about you, so I'm sorry if it's made you feel uncomfortable." The words hung in the air, and in that charged silence, I realized we were both learning in that moment. "I appreciate that, Beth," I said, feeling a swell of warmth toward her. "I really do value our relationship. I just want you to know the real me, Mia, who's not just Jake's girlfriend but someone you can let into your heart, too." Her eyes softened as she nodded, and a new understanding blossomed between us. "Then let's figure that out. Call me whatever you want, just as long as it sounds like we're a family, growing together." I've often noticed how the most awkward moments in life can blossom into the most beautiful connections if we allow ourselves to address them with honesty. As the evening came to a close and we both recognized the earlier tension had melted away, I couldn't help but reflect on how freeing it felt to claim my identity not just in front of Beth but also for myself. Later that evening, as I headed to the door, Jake wrapped his arm around my shoulder. "I saw that," he said with a teasing grin, "the way you two were just vibing. I'm so proud of you." I squeezed his hand, and the warmth of the night lingered in my heart. "Thanks, Jake. I think we're getting somewhere." Even as I walked away from the house, I understood that family dynamics could be messy. They could get bruised but also healed in ways I never anticipated, sometimes just by the act of speaking your truth. As I walked down the familiar path leading to Jake's car, my heart beat with a mix of excitement and anxiety. The stars twinkled in the cool night sky, each one a little affirmation of the night's progress. "You know," I said, breaking the silence as Jake opened the door for me, "I didn't realize how important that moment with Beth was until it happened." He settled into the driver's seat, glancing at me with curious eyes, his fingers tapping lightly against the steering wheel. "What do you mean?" I leaned back, trying to articulate the storm of emotions swirling inside me. "It's not just about her calling me Mia," I continued, hesitating just enough that I could capture the weight of my words. "It's about being seen. I've felt like a ghost in this relationship with her, like I'm just Jake's girlfriend, you know?" Jake nodded slowly, his expression softening. "I get it. You're more than just that title." The way he said it made my heart flutter, and for once, I felt relieved rather than anxious. "Yeah, and it made me realize, if I don't speak up for my identity, who will? I want her to know me as I am, not as she wishes I'd be." The drive felt like a blur, a soothing rhythm of tires on pavement, but my mind raced with thoughts about what lay ahead. Would Beth continue to call me Mia? Would she embrace this side of me that I was beginning to embrace myself? I tried to play it all out in my head, planning for every possible outcome, but each time I spiraled down a potential avenue, I tugged my thoughts back to the moment we had shared over Uno. We arrived at Jake's apartment, and as he opened the door, I followed him into the softly lit space, filled with the scent of his aftershave mixed with the faint aroma of leftover pizza. He turned to me with a playful smile. "Want to play a round of something? Or maybe just talk about your epic Uno strategy?" I laughed, letting the humor cut through the lingering tension. "Let's save the games for tomorrow, but I could definitely use a little unpacking of feelings tonight." I flopped onto the couch, feeling like with each word, I was unzipping a hidden compartment within myself. As the night stretched on, we talked about everything, about my work, my dreams, and of course, Jake's mom, and I could feel every layer of that emotional wall I'd built starting to dissolve. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "Beth can be a little tough, but maybe what you did today is what she needs to really get to know you. Sometimes it takes a little push." His words resonated with me, echoing in the corners of my mind. I thought back to all the family dinners where I felt some version of myself being misplaced. But speaking up had planted a seed. Maybe, just maybe, standing my ground would help both me and Beth grow closer as a family. "Maybe I'll bake her some muffins or something the next time I see her," I mused out loud. "Something safe and comforting, like a peace offering." Jake chuckled softly, the sound warm and friendly, like a cozy blanket wrapping around my worries. "You'd bake? I must record this monumental occasion." I rolled my eyes, but the laughter that bubbled to the surface felt genuine, washing over the remnants of yesterday's uncertainty. By the time we settled in, I felt a sense of calm enveloping me. The evening had turned out to be more than just a game, it was an invitation to foster understanding and acceptance. As we talked and laughed late into the night, I realized I was finally shaping the narrative of who I was, actively weaving my identity into the fabric of relationships that meant the most to me. Whether it was with Jake, Beth, or even myself, I was starting to own my story. As sleep pulled me away, I closed my eyes thinking of the possibilities and the small steps ahead. Who knew that a name could open so many doors? For now, I felt peace, accompanied by the gentle heartbeat of a new chapter just beginning.